Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Setting Millage Rates Workshop. I'm Mike Waguespack, your legislative auditor. We're here I'm here to just introduce and basically open up the meeting. We had a very successful meeting earlier this week. I think we had over 100, maybe 180 participants with a lot of good questions. Just for timing purposes, it should end around noon or later, just depending on the number of questions. So feel free to ask however many questions you need. We really had some very thorough discussions this past week, and we look forward to this seminar today. There's also a seminar, I believe, on March 19th in Napoleonville, which will be an in-person. So even though you're doing this, if you think you have more questions or want to do some more in-person one-on-one, feel free to attend that. I believe it's at the Community Center in Assumption Parish in Napoleonville on March 19th. There'll probably be some good food provided, as I'm told. So look forward to seeing you guys there. Without further ado, Ms. Joanne Garrison will be taking this over. This is, of course, a statewide reassessment year, so there's always challenges and a lot of questions with every reassessment. Just rely on us as your trusted advisors. Feel free to reach out. We're here for you to guide you through this process. We want everybody to have every opportunity to capture whatever millage rate, ad valorem tax that they need to make sure they provide the essential services to their constituents. So we don't want anybody to miss that opportunity. So as well, we'll have Patrick, one of our senior attorneys, here to review the open meetings law in great detail. Again, we're here for you, and we hope that you get your bang for your buck for this from this seminar. And if there's ever any questions, you ever need to meet with me in person in Baton Rouge or wherever, I'll come to you. Please reach out. It's good seeing everybody, and I hope that you have a great day and a great weekend. Y'all take care. Thank you. Ms. Joanne?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and participating this morning. We're glad to see you. Even though we can't see you in person, I can tell by the numbers that it is picking up. While we're still having some people log in and connect to the workshop, we're just going to go through a few little housekeeping things, as they say. We are glad to be able to offer these virtual workshops. This year we're doing two. We held the first one on Tuesday, and this being the second one. So Tuesday and Thursday of this week are our two virtual workshops. And then, like Mr. Waguespack said, we will be doing an in-person workshop in Napoleonville, which is Assumption Parish, on March the 19th. And then the second in-person workshop will be on, I believe it's April the 11th, in Ouachita Parish in West Monroe. So those registrations are available on our website as well. If you'd care to join us in person, we would love to see you at either one of those. I believe there's still space available for those. While there were no changes in the Constitution or the statutes that affect the actual millage adoption process, there were a few changes made to the open meetings law. So we're going to go over the open meetings law in details in a little bit later. Before we get started, I would like to thank everyone that helped put the workshops together. It's not just me that's here and working on these. It's quite a few people. So I'd like to thank Mr. Waguespack. He's always very supportive of the tax review office and the office as in a whole. He's here. He's supportive. He helps us. He gets the things that we need. And so I'd like to thank him. I'd like to thank Jennifer Shea, the Legislative Auditor's General Counsel. She's also the director of the division that I work with. She's very supportive. She's always positive. She's always there, a force behind me, and is very supportive and positive and provides the things that we need. I'd like to thank the senior attorneys in the office, Patrick Virgadamo. He's here with us today. He's going to be providing the information regarding the open meetings law to you a little bit later. And Angela Heath, she's another senior attorney in the office that you can reach out to regarding the open meetings law. Pam Mixon, she's the legal assistant. She provides assistance to me regarding the review of all of my documentation. So your setting millage rates book, the PowerPoints, either any correspondence, she's there to help me with that information. Craig Wiseman and Lizzie Shake Snyder, they helped me with the registration process today for the workshops. They helped with all the technology, the IT, because if you know me, you know that Joanne is not very proficient in all this technical stuff. So I do appreciate their help. Every one of those people have been vital in helping me set up these workshops. Just so you'll note that the continuing professional educational credit is not being offered for the millage workshops, just like in the past. The Legislative Auditor's Office does not offer that CPE credit. But if your agency offers that for you, feel free to email me and I can provide you confirmation of attendance as long as you are logged in individually. So be sure that you are logged in into the workshop and are participating individually. The way that it's set up is Zoom will create a spreadsheet of who has logged in. And if your name shows up on that spreadsheet, we can confirm that you have participated in the workshop. As we go through the PowerPoint, you'll see that it's just an outline of your setting millage rates book. So you will need to follow along in your setting millage rates book. If you have not already downloaded it or printed that out, you can do that right now. We'll take a few minutes for you to do that. It is available on our website, and it's also available in the chat box. Lizzie is here with me, and she put that out there in the chat box for you. So you should be able to find it there, or also, again, it's available on our website. In that setting millage rates book, you'll see that some of the information is repeated. The setting millage rates book is designed for that purpose. We don't want the user to have to flip back and forth once the taxing district has decided what millage adoption scenario they're going to follow for a particular year. So if a taxing district decides that they're going to roll forward, all they have to do is go to that section of the book and follow those guidelines there. Same thing if a taxing district decides they're not going to roll forward, they would just go to that section. They don't have to flip back and forth. One thing I want to remind you is neither the PowerPoint or the setting millage rates book will be all inclusive. It's up to the taxing district to seek guidance from your attorney if you have any questions on a specific issue that's not covered in the book. So again, thank you for being here. I do appreciate it. Your time is not lost on me. I do appreciate that, and I know that you're very busy, so thank you again. As we move through today's presentation, if you have any questions, please just submit those through the Q&A box, and we will try to address those as we go along. But if not, we will definitely catch those up toward the end of the presentation. One thing I do want to remind you of is the regular legislative session begins on Monday. That's March the 11th, and it runs through June the 3rd. It's going to be a very busy session. I have already started helping some of our auditors that work with the legislature. I've already started helping them work on some fiscal notes, and we've already taken a look at some of the bills. So if you as a taxing district have a bill going through, if you've approached one of your legislators and have asked them to present a bill on your behalf, it's up to you to keep up with that bill. The Legislative Auditor's Office will not follow that for you. You'll just have to keep up with that. And then, at the end of the session, let us know if it passed or failed and if it affects your ad valorem taxes. One thing I do want to point out to you before we get started, you'll note that on the screen, the updated date is February of 2024. Some of you may have a book that says updated January of 2024. That's fine. Don't get worried about that. The information is the same. There's just a couple of things that we had to add to the February book that we felt like offered more clarity to the reader. It's not a lot. It's just quite a few technical things, really. So as we go through, I will try to remember to point those out to you where they are, and you can make a note of those. On page 2 of the table of contents, I want to take a minute to point out that disclaimer at the bottom of page 2. Again, the requirements and the procedures discussed in the book and in the millage workshop, these are requirements by state law. The Legislative Auditor's Office does not set these requirements. We're just here to provide you with the information. We do not have any authority over these requirements, and there's no gray area in these requirements. The requirements cannot be waived. They are set by law. Again, they're set by law. So whenever in the roll forward where it says 30 days, 28 days are not 30 days. So just remember that we're just here to provide you the information, and the requirements cannot be waived. The final decisions about procedures should be made, or any questions should be made in consultation with your attorney. Okay. So with that, we're going to get started. The first section we're going to go over is the definitions. And we're not going to go over all of these definitions, because I feel like you can sit here and read the book just as easy as I can read it to you. So we're just going to touch on a few of these that I feel like they stand out. They're, the most important ones as we go through the millage adoption process. These are just a few of the terms that you'll hear quite often, to be honest with you. The very first one is the actual levy. It's also known as the authorized levy. This is the millage rates that's levied by you, the taxing district, and it's going to be collected in a particular year. So you're going to adopt this actual levy, the authorized rate. You're going to adopt it in a public meeting, either by resolution or ordinance. Then the millage documents will be submitted to this office for review. Then if the documents are certified, the actual levy will make its way to the tax rolls, and then finally it will be applied to the tax bills. So that is the rate that you're going to adopt by resolution or ordinance. It's the rate that is adopted in a public meeting. Then we're going to move down to the adjusted maximum millage and the maximum authorized millage. You might want to put like a bracket or some kind of note that those two rates generally work together. Especially whenever there is an increase in property value, those rates will work together. The adjusted maximum millage is the adjusted rate. Adjusted maximum millage is the maximum authorized millage rate as adjusted by reassessment. So it is the prior year's maximum millage as adjusted by reassessment. If the actual levy and the maximum authorized levy are different, both rates are going to be adjusted by reassessment. So if the rate you levied and the adjusted maximum millage are different, they both will be adjusted by reassessment. And then this last bullet, you might want to highlight it. Any rate up to and including the adjusted maximum millage may be levied without going through the roll forward process. So you can levy any rate up to that adjusted maximum millage rate without rolling forward. So it will only require following the open meetings law. One simple way that I like to explain what the adjusted maximum millage is when there is an increase in property value. Now, when there is an increase in property value, the adjusted maximum millage will be the lower rate. It's going to be the lower rate, and it will generate the same revenue as the prior year. So the adjusted maximum millage, when there is an increase in property value, will be the lower rate and will generally generate the same revenue as the prior year. Then the maximum authorized levy is the millage rate approved by the voters before reassessment has occurred. A rate approved by the voters does not have an adjusted maximum millage rate until it actually goes through reassessment. So the rate approved by the voters must first go through reassessment to calculate the adjusted maximum millage. So therefore, a new tax, which has just been approved by the voters, is not subject to reassessment. It's also the millage rate as adjusted by reassessment if there is a decrease in property value. If there is a decrease in property value, the millage rate is going to get pushed higher to generate the same revenue as the prior year. And then these last two bullets, you probably want to highlight those. The prior year's maximum after reassessment if there is an increase in property value, and the prior year's maximum will only be available until the next reassessment occurs. The prior year's maximum is just another term for maximum authorized millage. So prior year's maximum is also known as maximum authorized millage. Those two terms mean the same thing. So to simply put it, the maximum authorized levy is the higher rate when there is an increase in property value, and it has to be rolled forward in order to levy it. So when there is an increase in property value, you can levy the adjusted millage rate to receive the same revenue, or you can roll forward to any rate higher than the adjusted maximum millage up to the maximum authorized millage. And we're going to go over that roll forward a little bit later after we take a break. So on the next page, we'll talk about the procès-verbal. A procès-verbal is just a detailed written report of a proceeding or an election. It's just a report that after you have an election, by law, you're required to promulgate the election results, and so you're required to create the procès-verbal. Reassessment. Reassessment is the process mandated by the Louisiana Constitution to revalue all property subject to reassessment. We're going to go over reassessment in detail a little bit later. Reassessment adjusts the millage rates upward or downward depending on property value. So depending on what happens to property value, what's the results of the property value, your millage rates will either go upward or downward. The purpose of reassessment is to keep the total amount of ad valorem taxes collected by you, the taxing authority, the same as the prior year. So the purpose of reassessment is to stay revenue neutral. The adjusted millage rates as fixed in reassessment shall remain in effect unless changed by law. And then it says bonds, general obligation bonds are not affected by reassessment. And that's written in the law. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The roll forward, the last definition there, increasing the millage rate after reassessment from the adjusted maximum millage rate. So we know that's the lower rate. So increasing the millage rate from reassessment from the lower rate, which is the adjusted maximum millage rate, to a rate not in excess of the prior year's maximum, which is also known as the maximum authorized millage. That's the higher rate. Roll forward only occurs when there is a taxable property value increase at reassessment. So there's only a roll forward when property values increase. So those are the definitions real quick. Now we'll move on to the laws. Just keep in mind, it's always a good idea to communicate with the assessor before beginning the process, just so that you will know and have an idea of what to expect about like the timeline or the values. They can give you an idea, is there going to be an increase? Is there going to be a decrease? It's always a good idea to stay in communication with the assessor, especially this time of the year, because like Mr. Waguespack said, this is a statewide reassessment 2024. So you should not be adopting your millage rates just yet until you get those adjusted millage rates and you know what your options are. Article 7, Section 18F of the Louisiana Constitution, it mandates reassessment. It mandates that reassessment must occur on all property subject to taxation to be reappraised and revalued at least once every 4 years. So you see that says at least once every 4 years. So there are occasions that it could happen more often, okay? Reassessment is not done. Reassessment is done under the authority of each parish assessor and the Louisiana Tax Commission. The legislative auditor's office does not have anything to do with the actual act of reassessment. We do not revalue property. We do not know how the properties are revalued. That is up to the assessor and the tax commission. Article 7, Section 23B mandates the adjustment of ad valorem taxes either upward or downward depending on the property values. So what the legislative auditor does do is we take those property values given to us by the assessor, and then we adjust the millage rates either upward or downward. Again, we take the property values that have been calculated by the assessor, and we adjust the millage rates either upward or downward. Again, we do not have anything to do with the actual active reassessment or when it's called. We don't know when it's called. We do know that it's going to happen at least once every 4 years, but we do not know when it will be called outside of that 4-year period. But we will take the property values when it is called, given to us from the assessor, and adjust the millage rates either upward or downward depending on the increase or decrease of property values. Article 7, Section 23C of the Louisiana Constitution authorizes increases in the millage rates after reassessment, but not in excess of the prior year's maximum millage rate. So this is known as the roll forward. So if you get someone coming to you saying, how can you increase my taxes? Well, your answer would be Article 7, Section 23C of the state constitution gives us that ability to roll forward, which unfortunately is also increasing taxes, but is also increasing the revenue of the taxing district. Then Article 7, Section 23D states that reassessment does not apply to millage rates being levied to the payment of general obligation bonds. So there you go. That's the statute, the site that says that general obligation bonds are not subject to reassessment. Then revised statute 47-1705A and revised statute 11, section 1481 1A III. They generally have the same language that requires all tax recipient agencies of ad valorem taxes of every parish. 1705A excludes Orleans Parish. Revised statute 11 1481 does not. So all parishes within the state are required to adopt an ordinance or resolution each year with a millage rate to be applied to the assessed value. The authorizing ordinances or resolutions are required to be furnished to the assessor and the legislative auditor no later than June 1st of each year and no later than September 1 for St. Charles Parish only. So this right here tells you you are required to adopt a resolution or an ordinance each year adopting your ad valorem taxes. Those resolutions or ordinances are required to be turned in to the assessor by June 1st of each year. St. Charles Parish went before the legislature and got their deadline extended to September the 1st, which is perfectly fine. This year being a reassessment year, I'm not sure that you will be able to meet that June 1st deadline, but don't panic about that. There are AG opinions that allow the assessor's office to waive the June 1st deadline. So that's why it's a good idea to stay in communication with your assessor's office to find out what is their deadline for the submission of these millage documents. Generally, the assessors are pretty good about waiving that deadline in a reassessment year. When it's not reassessment, June 1st is pretty much attainable unless there's some unusual circumstance. But in a reassessment year, the assessors will generally waive the June 1st deadline. Revised statute 47-1705B. It authorizes increases in millage rates after reassessment to millage rates not exceeding the prior year's maximum, which we know is also known as the maximum authorized millage, and sets forth additional notice requirements. So this 47-1705B provides all those additional notice requirements when you're rolling forward. And if you have been in your position for any length of time or been around these millage workshops, there are quite a few extra steps you have to follow in order to roll forward. So don't panic about that. It's done all the time, and it's fairly easy once you get the hang of it, but we're going to go through those in detail a little bit later. On the next page of your setting millage rates book, Revised Statute 47-1705.1A. The provisions of this section shall apply to any parish with a population of 245,000 to 265,000 according to the census. So currently, St. Tammany Parish is the only parish that falls within this population bracket. And what it does is 47-1705.1B requires any parish within that population. It requires the non-elected taxing bodies to coordinate their public hearings and public meetings with respect to increasing their millage rates. So with respect to rolling forward to coordinate their public hearings and public meetings with the parish governing authority. The parish governing authority will designate, will schedule their public hearings and public meetings, and then the taxing districts will have to coordinate that with the parish governing authority only when they roll forward and if they are a non-elected taxing authority. Revised Statute 47-1993A4. It requires municipalities that prepare their own tax rolls and assessment lists to submit their millage rates, their prepared rolls to the tax commission and the legislative auditor. Now, the next section is Revised Statute 4211 through 28. That is the open meetings law. So we are going to skip over these next few sites because Patrick Virgadamo, he is going to be here shortly to go over the open meetings law with you in detail. So I don't want to just beat that into you, as they say. We're going to skip over that and let Patrick, because he is great with that, and you will have a lot of information walking away with that. So on the next page of your setting millage rates book, we're going to go down to Revised Statute 18, Section 1285. What it does is it provides that a notice of an election be given. If the notice of election affects ad valorem taxes, the notice shall also state that a portion of the monies collected shall be remitted to certain state and statewide retirement systems. Now, I want to be clear that the Legislative Auditor's Office does not have anything to do. We have no authority over the actual election. That falls under the Secretary of State's office. The reason that we put this site in the setting millage rates book is because of the prosse verbal. If you as a taxing district present a proposition to the voters and that proposition passes, once the proposition passes by law, by Revised Statute 18-1293, you are required to create that prosse verbal, and within that prosse verbal, you are required to include a notice of election and a proof of publication. And then you're required to record that prosse verbal with the Secretary of State's office. So we need that prosse verbal to be as complete and accurate as possible. So that's why we put these two sites in this book. We want you aware of these two sites, but again, we have no authority over the actual election. But we need that information to be as accurate as possible and to be submitted to the Secretary of State's office as a complete and accurate document. Then Article 6, Section 33B of the state constitution states that the full faith and credit of a political subdivision is hereby pledged to the payment of a general obligation bond. It's issued by it under this constitution or the statute or proceedings pursuant by which they are issued. The governing authority of the political subdivision shall levy and collect or cause to be levied and collected on all taxable property ad valorem taxes sufficient to pay principal and interest on such bonds as they mature. So you might want to underline or highlight that last term, on such bonds as they mature. So the definition of as they mature, the way we define that is as they mature means as they progress. So you want to be recalculating that repayment schedule, every year or every couple of years to be sure that the millage rate applying to that bond is accurate. You don't want to be applying the same millage rate to that bond for the entire duration or for, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, because property values have changed by that time. So your millage rate should change. Sometimes they will go up, sometimes they will go down, but there should be some fluctuation in your bond millage rate. You don't want to over collect, and you definitely don't want to under collect when it comes time for your bonds to mature. Revised Statute 24.513.0. It requires the Legislative Auditor's Office to annually review, calculate, and certify the amount due to each public retirement system. It also requires the Legislative Auditor to submit to each sheriff or tax collector a report setting forth and certifying the amounts due from each taxing recipient agency to each public retirement system. So by law, the Legislative Auditor's Office is required to calculate the amounts due the public retirement systems. Revised Statute 13, Section 5565 requires each sheriff or tax collector to deduct the amount certified by the Legislative Auditor and remit that amount of money to the appropriate public retirement system. Those are known as the pension reports. Those reports are available on our website. The 2023 reports are out on our website right now. So if you'd like to go look at those reports, they're on our public page, they're public document. So you're more than welcome to go look at those reports right now. The next section we're going to go over is the open meetings law. But before we get to that, I just want to give you a little information about this. Previously, this is where you would see the AG opinions in your setting millage rates book. However, the opinions have been removed from the setting millage rates book, and we're not going to go over those in the workshops. They seem to have caused some confusion in the past on the basis of law and if they were our opinions. So they are not the legislative auditor's opinions. They are opinions of the Attorney General's office. So we have removed that information. And if you need more information on those, you would need to contact the Attorney General's office. The legislative auditor's office does not enact law. And again, remember that it is each taxing district's responsibility for seeking your own opinion for that interpretation of that law for any particular law if you need it. Certainly we can give you guidance on the ad valorem tax process or the open meetings law, but the opinions that were provided were strictly the opinion of the AG. They were not the opinions of the legislative auditor. So with that being said, we're going to go on and move to the open meetings law. I do want to introduce you to Patrick Virgadamo. He is a senior attorney here in the office. We also have Angela Heath in the office. They both are senior attorneys. Both are very knowledgeable when it comes to the open meetings law. They have researched it and they have written opinions on it. So if you have a general question about the open meetings law, you can definitely contact one of them. However, Patrick is here with us today. He's great. He's here with us to provide a detailed review. Patrick graduated from LSU Law School, I think in 2009, if I remember correctly. And I think he's been with the office ever since then. So, that's been quite a while. He does research, writes numerous opinions and various questions, answers various questions for us here in the auditor's office, but also the legislature, for you, the local government. He's readily available. He tries to help out who he can. So with that being said, let's welcome Patrick. And again, feel free to shoot your questions in while he's here. He'll be here a little while, so please send your questions and answers, and he'll be happy to answer those. Let's welcome Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the open meetings law. We'll try to focus a lot of our attention specifically on how it affects you guys as far as the millage process, but it's important to note that this law applies for these public bodies for any of their meetings. And so it's something that you can take away from not just for the millage process, but also any of the meetings that you may hold. So if you want to follow along in the millage rates book, it's going to be on pages 9 through 14, and I'll try to give you cues of when we're going to go to a new page in there. So the first law we're going to talk about is Article 12, Section 3 of the Louisiana Constitution. It essentially states no person shall be denied the right to observe the deliberations of public bodies and examine public documents, except in cases established by law. So this is essentially our foundation for the open meetings law as well as the public records law. We often call them sunshine laws, and the idea of this comes from a former quote from former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who in a case said, sunshine is said to be the best of disinfectants. The idea that when things are done in the light of day, there's less corruption. And so it's important to note that this grants a constitutional right to the public to watch. It gives a constitutional right to the public in order to make sure that they can observe those deliberations unless there is an exception provided for by law. So 42:12 is our first statute in the open meetings law that has some substance to it. It basically is an edict that the provisions of the open meetings law have to be construed liberally. And what this means is if there's a question of whether or not something should allow the public to see it or allow the public entity to do it outside of an open meeting, if it's a 50-50 shot, the court is instructed to interpret it in favor of the public. And so any provision, especially where there are exceptions that allow you to go into, say, executive sessions, because of this provision, you have to make sure you're strictly following what the law requires to use that exception. So 42:13 gives us some important definitions, which we are used throughout the open meetings law. The first is a public body. Public body is defined as essentially your municipal governing authorities, your parish governing authorities, so your board of aldermen, your city town councils, your police juries, your parish councils, school boards. It's going to be your levy boards, your boards of port commissioners, your boards of special districts, so your fire protection district, your ambulance district, your drainage district, all of those, plus your commissions and authorities, all those entities that essentially have some kind of a board that operate. It also includes committees and subcommittees of these bodies. And so a question that comes along a lot to us is, well, what about our audit committee? Well, if it's a committee of the public body, that committee has the same requirements we're going to talk about posting their notice, keeping their minutes. And so they have to follow that just as much as if they were the actual body itself. Now, meetings, a meeting is a gathering of a quorum of that public body, which we just talked about, to do one of two things: to deliberate or act on matters which are within the jurisdiction, controlled advisory power of that public body, or, and this is the one that catches most people and get in trouble, or to receive information regarding a matter over which they have control, supervision, jurisdiction, or advisory power. So if someone's coming to speak to the council and the council is receiving information about something that's part of their jurisdictional control, that is an open meeting. That is a meeting that requires to follow the open meetings law. One question that comes up a lot is, what about if you're attending training? Now, training, if it's an in-service where it's specific to stuff, learning about the activities and functions of your entity, it may fall under the open meetings law. If it's just a general training, say you're at our local Center for Local Government Excellence, that meeting, even if a quorum of the body is there, it is not a meeting of that body. They're going to attend something else that's information that's outside of their specific sphere. Now, it doesn't include chance gatherings or social gatherings, which no votes or straw polling or informal polling occurs. Louisiana, we love our festivals. Almost everybody in the community ends up at them. So if at some local community event, a majority of the council shows up, that's not a problem unless they start talking business. Don't be that person. That's what I usually tell people. Enjoy the moment, wait and have your open meetings when you're supposed to. Kind of the old adage, a lot of boards get in trouble because they have the meeting and then they adjourn the meeting for the real meeting at the local steakhouse or whatever. That usually gets them in trouble. Now, quorum is a simple majority of the total membership of the board. So, for example, 3 members constitutes a quorum of a 5-person board. excuse me, the statutes creating a public body can provide a specific definition for quorum, which can be higher or lower than the default under the open meetings. For instance, a lot of these big regional commissions that kind of come up with advisory things, because like a 14, 16 member regional board, they probably have trouble traditionally getting 9 people there. So the law may provide that it's like a 30 or 40% of them constitutes a quorum, especially when they're more advisory. So you want to look at your specific laws and see if there's something that deviates from the normal definition of quorum. Now, it's important because it says that of the total membership. We get a lot of questions. What about if a position is vacant? Well, vacant positions still count towards a quorum. So if you have a 5-member board, it doesn't matter how many of those positions are vacant, you're always going to need 3 people to have a quorum for your meetings. So it's important that a local entity, if you start seeing vacancies, get those filled. We had lots of times where a small village or a town where, because of vacancies, they've gotten into a situation where there weren't enough people to actually have a quorum to fill those vacancies. And so you want to make sure you work to be diligent so that you don't get into a situation like that. And in some cases, if you miss out and can't have a quorum, then the law usually requires the governor to appoint someone to fill that vacancy so that you can then continue doing business. Now, a variant of this that comes out is what is called a walking quorum. This is something the AG has kind of come up, and you want to avoid these at all costs. What essentially the classic example would be: council member A goes to visit council member B. Council member A tells council member B, I have this idea, are you on board? They have their conversation. Council member A then goes and sees council member C, says, hey, I just got done talking with council member B. He's on board, are you on board? And they keep doing this. Well, in practice, technically at no point was there ever physically a quorum present. However, constructively, a quorum of a majority of the board has essentially met outside of an open meeting to do business that the law requires them to do in front of the public. And so the AG says this is a violation of the very spirit of the open meetings law. And so it is a violation and you need to avoid it. Now, questions we get are, can we email and say, hey, I'd like to put this on the agenda? That's fine. It's when you get into those discussions where it becomes a problem. Now, 42:14, it basically gives us the edict that first, meetings have to be open. So what this says is if you have what defines as a public body having a meeting, a quorum of that body for those 2 purposes, and so it's a meeting, it has to be open to the public unless the law gives you authority to close it, such as executive sessions under 42:16, 17, and 18. So this 42:14 continues on the next page of the workbook, where it talks about voting, which is the other big edict of the open meetings law, is that, okay, you have the meeting is open, but you also have to have members physically present to vote. There are 2 exceptions. One is you're operating under the gubernatorially declared disaster exception under 42:17.1, or it's on the individual basis, it's an individual with a disability, which we'll talk about under the new 42:17.2.1. Otherwise, the member has to be physically present. We get lots of questions. Hey, can they just participate on it via teleconference, or can they just give you on the cell phone? No, the law requires you to be physically present, viva voce, the live voice. Votes must be cast according to the AG orally or electronically. If there's some machine that displays votes, it cannot, the point is it needs to identify who voted. For example, in most cases, people will do roll call, especially for important votes, to show that they know they had if it required 2/3, that they had that. Proxy votes are not allowed unless the law provides for it. An example would be the law says public official or their designee. So the law gives that public official authority to basically have someone else show up for them. No secret balloting, straw polling, or other means to circumvent a public vote. And then the AG has specifically cautioned members of public bodies up against using texting or other electronic communications to conduct meetings, to basically talk about something that instead of talking to the public. That AG opinion is 14-0140. Now, public participation and commenting is the other kind of edict under 4214. Public bodies, except school boards, which we'll talk about in a minute, must afford opportunity for public commenting before acting on agenda items. This can be a single period at the beginning of the meeting, or it can be before each item on the agenda, or it could be a combination of. Some entities will have a general commenting period of things on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, but for specifically the more controversial meeting items, they may specifically ask, is there additional public commenting for those individual items? You cannot, and we get in this question, well, what about if we put it at the end of the meeting? Well, no, that violates it, because the idea is you're supposed to allow the public to comment before you take action, not afterwards. School boards, their rule is a little different. Instead of being able to have a single period, it's specifically under 4215 says they have to have a public commenting period for each item. And that, if you think about that, that makes sense, because in some cases, those agenda items may be specific to like a school, a student, versus more general policy things. And so you want, it's easy. They usually have long agendas, and you usually don't want a lot of people talking and not knowing what they're talking about. And so that one, the law is basically developed to say you need to do a public commenting for each item. So 4214E is our new kind of amendment that was done this past legislative session last year. Now, public entities, historically, the way I've tried to explain to people, this has to do with participation by disabled members of the public or their caregivers. This is an extension of what you already have as an obligation of the Americans with Disability Act to provide public accommodations, like at your meeting place, where you had to make sure there was a ramp or people with a wheelchair could access the meeting. What this law now says is, if a public body who has a capability to do meetings through electronic means, so teleconferencing, video conferencing, such as Zoom, they shall adopt rules and regulations and procedures that allow any member of the public with a disability that is recognized under the Americans with Disability Act or their caretaker to participate in a meeting if the person requests. And so the idea is for public commenting, if you have the ability to do Zoom, or you already do Zoom meetings, you need to make sure you adopt some rules and procedures. So if a member of the public wants to comment remotely, they can do that, both before or during the meeting. Now, for public bodies that don't have the capability to do those electronic means, they live out in the country, they don't necessarily have broadband, so they still have to adopt rules, but their rules have to be a way to facilitate viable alternative methods for the members of the public or those caretakers to participate. So it may be, we're going to have a link or an email address. If you want to submit a public comment on an agenda item, you have to submit it so many hours beforehand. Obviously, you don't want to make that requirement more onerous than the time period for you putting your agenda, because they need to know it's an agenda item. But basically, and that will read into the record. The legislature did that during COVID, where basically you would hear them say, hey, I've got these many green cards, these many red cards, we're reading them into the record. Basically, there's a process. So even if someone wasn't necessarily participating and being able to comment live via Zoom, they had a means to submit that. The key thing for both of those is adoption of rules, regulations, and procedures. It shouldn't be done willy-nilly. The idea should be, you should kind of have an idea of how you're going to do it. For instance, if you know you already have Zoom, or you're going to basically offer Zoom as the alternative, once you do that, you'll find that in most cases, it's going to probably resolve most of the requests you get, because once that's in a mechanism, that's probably going to solve the problem for participation for most of the public. State agencies, which none of them should be here, but they have a different rule. They have to basically promulgate through the APA, so they can't just do rules. They have to do formal rules. And this provision is not applicable to executive sessions. So obviously, the members of the public, you can turn off the video and audio for an executive session out to the public for those meetings. And it doesn't include those entities that are provided under 42:17.2I that are excluded. So the legislature, BSC, Board of Regents, Ethics Board, Civil Service, and things of that sort. 4215, we already talked about the school board commenting. Now, on the next page, we get into 42:17.1. This exception, there's a lot of confusion because it was created during COVID. It is an exception to the open meetings law that allows telecommunication, like basically a speakerphone or Zoom meetings. But it's an exception to the open meetings law, so it has to be strictly construed. And it only allows those for circumstances for disasters and emergencies declared by the governor. The mayor, the parish president, even the president of the United States, it doesn't matter. Unless the disaster is declared by the governor, this provision of the open meetings law does not apply. For right now, I'm not aware of any emergency or declarations that would be applicable for anyone that would allow this to be conducted. We know some people are like, oh, we like these Zoom meetings, so we kept doing them. No. But in the cases, especially as we prepare for hurricane season every year, it's important to kind of know about this exception so that if the unfortunate happens and you're unable to meet, these are some of the requirements in order to use this exception to do those virtual meetings. One, the governor has to declare a state of emergency or disaster that involves the geographic area of the within the jurisdiction of the public entity. So a hurricane is hitting your parish. In that case, then it may trigger this. COVID was a unique one because it was a statewide emergency that was declared. The second step is you have the declaration issued, but it also has to be such that the emergency disaster is such of a nature that it keeps you from meeting in person. Example could be a Katrina situation where people are not even together in the same physical parish because of the situation post-Katrina. So that would be a scenario where that kind of emergency that was declared by the governor would not allow you to meet under the normal rules. So the presiding officer has to certify the notice of that meeting and agenda is limited to only certain things. So they're going to allow you to meet in a disaster, but it can't just be for any reasons. It's limited to certain things. The first and obvious one is going to be anything related to your response to the disaster or emergency that are critical to health, safety, or welfare. It's also going to be those matters that if they're delayed will cause stoppage of vital public services. So you need to vote on a grant or a contract to get stuff going, or we'll call severe economic dislocation or hardship. The other final one that's always going to be okay is matters that are critical to continuation of the body that can't be postponed into a normal meeting because of legal requirements or deadlines. So you got to sign off on things so that your audit can get submitted. You have a deadline to get a vote of the approval of the committee so that the grant can be issued by the federal government. So the question becomes, what about other matters that don't fit those three categories? So they amended the law in the next session to add a fourth category, but it has some unique requirements. The fourth category now is other matters that are critical or time sensitive, and the presiding officer determines we can't delay this. We need to go ahead and do this. We need to issue this, whatever. It's not necessarily because the law says we have a deadline, but practically it needs to get done. So it allows those to be added, but it requires that 2/3 of the members present at the meeting have to first agree to take up those additional agenda items. So they're on the agenda, but they still require some further action once you get into the meeting to actually take them up. We've always noted if a quorum of your body can physically meet, it's kind of hard to say that you can't meet under the normal rules. Obviously, with COVID and stuff, there were some unique circumstances there. But the key thing there is it's a deviation from the normal rules. Some special rules for these meetings: the public body no later than 24 hours before the meeting, excluding weekends and holidays, has to have their notice and agenda and this is what's unique to it, detailed information on how members of the public can participate and submit comments regarding agenda items. I would suggest to you the part we talked about earlier about for a disabled member of the community to participate. If you stream your events, you may want to include your policy that you adopt and your procedures should probably include something on your being placed on your agenda to say, if you would like to submit comments or participate via these, here's the link to go to watch the live stream of this event. The notices have to be posted on your website. It also has to be provided to media that request, and this is the very unique thing for this exception, it has to be provided widely distributed to every known news media outlet that broadcasts or publishes within your geographic area of your jurisdiction. So your news stations, your radio stations, your newspapers, all of those type of entities, you have to basically disseminate it to them through those media. So the next page of this talks about that the public entity has to provide a mechanism for public commenting both prior and during the meeting. Again, that's something you would want to address with the disability. But it also has to properly identify and acknowledge all public comments during the meeting and maintain those as though they were part of the meeting minutes. The presiding officer, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to publish those, but you have to maintain them with your records. The presiding officer has to ensure that each person participating is properly identified. So if you're using Zoom, you're going to want to make sure your policies and procedures say that someone properly identify their name in their window, so it doesn't say like iPhone 65432, something along those lines. You want to make sure it actually is a name and that those people are recognized as they're doing the meeting. And then that the key here is you want to make sure all parts of the meeting, except for those things such as executive session, which are closed, that are clear and audible to all participants. The idea is you can't just say, oh, we clicked it, it's working, we had technical difficulty, and we soldiered on. No, the point of the exception is so you and the public can still observe it. So if you're having technical difficulties, you have to stop. 42:17.2.1 is the other disability related change that happened. And this one's a big one for public bodies. This is allows participation of a disabled member of the public body. And again, this only applies to the member, not in general. So it applies to all state and local public bodies as defined under the open meetings law, except the legislature and parish boards of election supervisors. What this law now provides is a member of the public body who has a disability recognized by the ADA. They are allowed to participate and vote via electronic means, video or teleconferencing, and they don't have to be physically present. All the other members have to still be physically present. There is no exception for lack of capability to conduct electronic meetings. So whereas the members of the public, you can do alternative means if you don't have capability. But because it's a member by member specific request, it can be as simple as just using a speakerphone. Someone puts them on the speakerphone while you're having the meeting. So that person is still attending. Their participation via the phone or via like video conferencing, it counts towards making your quorum. Those people participating still receive their per diem. And just like with the rules for the members of the public, you have to adopt some rules and procedures to facilitate how you're going to do this. One question that's come up is, how much do we need to get, like, do we need doctor's notes and stuff? What we've generally recommended, and Angela's done a lot of presentations on this, for the public, you really don't want that. Just assume that when they tell you they need accommodation for that, you're going to meet that. Again, if you have like Zoom and you're streaming your meeting, that's usually going to resolve almost any accommodation request for the public. For your member of the public body, you may want more information to make sure that it's actually something that meets an ADA required disability. Again, that's going to be up to the public body how they adopt their rule to do it. But the key thing is it only applies to the person who has the disability that's a member that makes the accommodation request. Everybody else, just because it's now going to be streamed, doesn't mean council member B, C, and D can also remotely participate. It has to be only the person with the disability. So 4219, that is our provision that addresses notice and agenda of meetings. The key thing is notice is required and the agendas are required to be posted. With that, there are two essential requirements. One, if you have regularly scheduled meetings that are either set by statute, local ordinance, charter, whatever provision it says, for instance, the town has an ordinance that says our monthly meetings are going to be the third Tuesday of every month. When you have those regularly scheduled meetings at the beginning of the calendar year, you have to post a notice of when all those meetings are going to occur for the year. And so you're working out, okay, we know December the third Tuesday happens to be Christmas that year. So we're not going to meet on that date. We're going to meet on a different date for the monthly meeting. That are all the things that would get posted at the beginning of the year to let people know when your regular meetings are going to occur. That's separate from the requirement that everyone has, is that before the individual meeting, you have a notice that has to be posted at least 24 hours, not counting weekends, holidays, before the meeting. That notice has to include certain things. It has to include the date, time, location, and agenda. So you want to know, the idea is if someone invited you to something, you're going to know when is it, what time is it, where is it, and then for the agenda, what are we going to talk about? That issue, the issue comes up of how do we post that notice? Well, you have options. The law says, one, you can post it at your actual your official office, or if you don't have an official office where you meet to have your meetings, you can post it outside. That's the most common way people do it. Practically, a lot of people do that because that way, if there's last minute things right before that 24-hour deadline, they can just pop up an agenda and be good. It can also be posted in the paper. One question that came up, someone had on our Tuesday one was, what happens if we post it in our paper, something changes and we don't have time to repost it in the paper, the revised agenda, what do we do? Post it as a revised agenda on your website and post it on at where you meet. So you're still, that is your agenda, final agenda that you're going to be doing, but you want to make sure the public knows. It's important to note that you also have to provide a copy of that notice for those individual meetings to the news media that requests notice. What we usually tell people is just create an email listserv so that whenever you post or send it off to your journal to post your agenda, you're also sending it out to those people who have requested it. The agenda itself, because this is where people usually get in trouble, it needs to be descriptive language. It can't just say new business. You need to actually have agenda items that are separate, listed separately, and actually tell you, someone in the public, if they were looking at what are you going to actually do. Joanne will talk about a little bit when she goes through the millage process for you of things she looks for specifically in her process, certain action verbs and things of that sort. But the key is, the AG says, you need to make it descriptive enough so that people know what you're doing. You're not hiding the ball, so they know if they want to attend or not. The key thing, though, is that deadline for posting also is you can't make changes. So once that 24-hour period sets in, and again, that excludes holidays and weekends, you cannot make changes to your agenda. That said, once you get into the meeting, the law says the public body, by a vote of, it has to be basically unanimous of everyone of the members actually in attendance to add something to the agenda. So if something happens in that 24-hour period, something comes up and you need to take care of it, you can have someone move to add an item to the agenda, and it has to be a unanimous vote of everyone of the council that or the board that are actually present. The key thing there, I always tell people, is don't get into a routine of, hey, we're not going to put it on the agenda and we're just going to add it afterwards. That really doesn't go within the spirit of the open meetings law, because you want to make sure people have notice of at least 24 hours that you're going to take up something. I know Joanne will tell you, usually if something gets added and it's part of their stuff that you're trying to show her that you did for the millage setting process, we're going to want minutes that show that someone who made the motion and that there was unanimous, there was no dissension essentially to add that to the item, to the agenda. 4219.1 gives us an additional notice. So in circumstances where the political subdivision wants to propose a new ad valorem tax, sales and use tax, or increase or renew an existing property tax or sales and use tax, and that involves authorizing the calling of an election for that purpose, this is an additional notice, including in addition to the normal 24-hour notice. This notice has to have the date, time, and location, and it has to be published in the official journal 20 to 60 days before you have the meeting. This doesn't apply to roll forward. It has its own processes. You also have to make sure that in a meeting before this meeting, you're going to give notice verbally in the meeting of that meeting when you're going to take up this action to recommend renewal of a tax, proposing a new tax, or increasing an existing tax. You also have to give additional notice to each member of the governing authority that's required to approve tax-related measures. So if your parish has a requirement that all those boards created by it have to run their tax stuff by the board, by the parish council first, you have to make sure they're getting notice of this meeting 20 to 60 days ahead of time. You also have to provide notice to each state senator and representative in whose district all or portion of the political subdivision is located. The idea is if you're going to be proposing a new tax, that legislator is probably going to get phone calls from their constituents. And so they need to know ahead of time that you're going to be having this meeting so they can be knowledgeable and prepared for those constituent calls. 4219 took care of our notice and agenda. 4220 is our minutes. So it's the requirements of what you have to do to take minutes in the actual meeting. The law basically says written minutes of all open meetings have to be kept. These are generally going to be a permanent record. And on the next page, as it continues in the workshop, in the handbook, they are a public record. So you have to provide access to inspect or provide copies upon request. They have to be made available to the public within a reasonable time after the meeting, except as otherwise provided by law. These are not a verbatim transcript. They just need to make sure they're sufficiently descriptive to the reader so they know what matters were considered, the outcome of the votes, and identify what that legal procedures were complied with. Minutes shall include at a minimum date, time, and location of the meeting, who was present or who was absent, substance of the matters decided, and at the request of a member, a record by individual of any vote. So if they ask for a record vote, you're recording roll call votes, and any other information the public body specifically requests be included in the minutes. So if a council member says, I'd like the minutes to reflect me asking that by the next meeting, I want this information, that would go in your minutes. So you take those minutes, they're out there. So what do you do with them? Well, the law requires you to publish them, but not in the open meetings law. It's in Title 43. Title 43 for municipalities, parish governing authorities, and school boards. So your any meetings of your town council, city council, board of aldermen, your police juries, parish councils, or school boards, the law is in 43:143, which says these entities shall provide copies of their minutes to their official journal. 43:144 says you shall provide that to your official journal no later than 20 days from the meeting. And there are criminal penalties if they don't do it. Other political subdivisions, so your special districts, pretty much anybody else, because we had questions, what about law enforcement districts? All of those other districts, these other political subdivisions that are not municipal governing authorities, parish governing authorities, or school boards, they are required to publish their minutes in their journal under 43:171. It does not give a specific deadline, so it's within a reasonable time. However, what we've told people is if you can get it to your official journal within 20 days, which is what's required for the city, parishes, and school boards, it's going to be hard for someone to say that's not reasonable because you're meeting the same deadline they are. One question that comes up a lot is, well, is it for the city, parish, and school board, is it 20 days from when we approve the minutes? No, it's from the meeting itself. The AG, in addressing this, even for other political subdivisions, has said you have an obligation to give those minutes within a reasonable time after the meeting. You cannot say we're only going to do it when they become the official minutes, because you might have a public body that doesn't meet every 3 months. And so you can't make the public wait to meet again to approve the minutes. What the AG says is any concerns about corrections to the minutes should be reflected in the minutes of that next meeting. So there should be no reason to delay putting out your minutes because, oh, we haven't met and approved them. Doesn't work that way. And if you're a city, parish, or school board, the law, you're basically potentially committing a criminal offense by not getting it to your to your journal within the 20 days prescribed. Finally, whether you're a city, parish, or school board, or any other political subdivision, if you have a website, you are required under the open meetings law, so we come back to 4220, to post a copy of those minutes on your website within 10 days from when you publish them in your journal. And you have to keep the previous 3 months of minutes on your website. Some places will keep a year, some will years, but you have to have at least the previous 3 months on a rotating basis on your website. Now, 4223, it basically says that the recording of meetings, except closed portions of executive session, may be video or tape recorded, filmed, or broadcast live. The thing to understand is that is a right of the public. So it's basically saying the public has a right, if they want to record you having your meeting. You can't tell them, oh, I don't consent to you recording. Too bad. The law says they have a right. What you can do is establish standards for the equipment and recording locations. You can basically politely say, if you're going to stand up and record with your iPhone, you need to stand over here so that you're not standing in front of everybody else or in the camera that's streaming our Zoom meeting for the members of the public participating remotely. So you can establish those standards. You can make sure that they're not dragging cords across. One of the examples you usually see is if there's a dais or a table, press in those usually will have a little recorders or their iPhone sitting up there by the mic so that they can record and use it for themselves later without being obtrusive. Non-elected boards or commissions that have authority to tax. So if you're a non-elected board or commission and you're probably in this workshop now because you can tax, and so you need to do your millages, you are required to video record, film, or broadcast your proceedings of your public meetings. The idea is because you have tax authority and you're not elected, they want to make sure these entities record their meetings. There's an exception, however, that was added not long afterwards in 33:9099.2, which basically for these neighborhood crime prevention and security districts, improvement districts, and those other districts created under Chapter 29 of Title 33, because a lot of those are basically HOAs or like a little community board. They're not required to record it. It may still be a good practice because you can just record it with like a phone so that the person doing the minutes has a record. Because that's kind of an onerous requirement, they put into the public records law in 44:36F that recordings have to be only kept 2 years versus the normal 3. And then finally, the big thing is violations of the open meetings law. Any action that's in violation of the open meetings law can be voidable if legal action is commenced within 60 days of the action. So the idea is kind of like on the playground, the no harm, no foul. If you don't call it, it didn't happen. 60 days, if someone doesn't challenge because something happened as a violation of the open meetings law, then it's too late. That said, if the action involves you're doing millage requirements and you didn't do those, you might still have a problem. If somebody properly challenges the action, there are potential civil penalties up to $500 per violation for willful violations of open meetings law. And that's a personal liability. So it comes out of your pocket, not of the taxpayers. The key thing to remember, if you as a body think something wasn't done right, you can correct it yourself. The AG has made it clear. If at the next meeting, you put it back on your agenda and you make sure we had public commenting, we voted on it, that fixes any issues. So sometimes when in doubt, just put it back on your agenda and make sure you go do it again so that it's done right. With that, do we have any questions? And if you don't necessarily have them right now, if you'll get on our website on lla.la.gov, under the resources legal assistance, we have a link where you can submit questions. And so myself, Angela, or our general counsel, Ms. Shea, they'll get them to us, and we try to respond same day if possible, or at least the next day. Jennifer on our presentations always tells people if 2 days have passed and you haven't heard from us, call 911 because something's happened. And that's business days though, because we've had some people go, well, I sent it to you at 4:45 on Friday afternoon and I didn't hear from you till Monday. Well, business days. So don't call 911 in those cases. I don't see we have any questions. So I think we'll pass it on to Joanne.
Okay, we're back. Thank you, Patrick. That was very informative. Patrick's always good at sharing that information with us. So thank you again, Patrick. One update I did wanted to provide you, if you have a January book, there was an update that was for revised statute 4215. So that should have been in the open meetings law section right there. Of course, under revised statute 4214E, you would have seen revised statute 4215, but it applies to school boards and their public comment period, how they should stop immediately prior to each individual agenda item to allow that public comment period. So I feel like if you're a school board, you probably are aware of that already. I think you're doing good. But anyway, that's one of the updates that was applied to the February setting millage rates book. So with that being said, we have one more little section we're going to go over before we take a break, and that is the reassessment section. 2024 is a statewide reassessment, so I feel like it's important that we review what happens in reassessment. So again, let's just get started with that, and after this, we'll take a break. So Article 7, Section 18F of the Louisiana Constitution, we've already discussed that a little bit in the laws, but it does require all property subject to reassessment, subject to taxation to be reappraised and revalued at least once every 4 years. So you might want to highlight that at least once every 4 years. 2024 is a statewide reassessment, but there are occasions where individual parishes are reassessed. But again, that's up to the parish assessor and the tax commission. The legislative auditor's office has nothing to do with the actual act of reassessment. That's not a decision that we would make. Article 7, Section 23B of the state constitution, if reassessment is done and when reassessment is done, it mandates the adjustment of ad valorem taxes either upward or downward based off of those property values that are calculated by the assessor. So this is when the legislative auditor would get involved. The assessor would submit those property values to the legislative auditor through a secured site, and we would adjust the millage rates either upward or downward, again, using the property values that are calculated by the assessor. Article 7, Section 23C authorizes the millage rates after reassessment, increases in those millage rates, but not in excess of the prior year's maximum. And we know that prior year's maximum, when there is an increase in property values, is that higher rate. It's the maximum authorized millage rate. And then, of course, D states that reassessment does not apply to general obligation bonds. When reassessment is done, the results of reassessment, it could be that if there is a decrease in property value, your millage rate is going to go higher. It's going to increase to ensure the same dollars as the prior year. If there is an increase in property value, your millage rates will go down, again, to ensure the same dollars as the prior year. If you've heard me before, you may have heard me explain it as like a balancing scale. Like we stated earlier, one of the purposes of reassessment for you, the taxing district, is to stay revenue neutral. So the millage rates are going to adjust so that your revenue will stay neutral. Depending on those property values, if they increase or decrease, your millage rates are going to adjust to keep that scale balanced, to stay revenue neutral. And then if your property values stay the same or pretty close to the same, no adjustment's going to be made to your millage rates. For this year, for 2024, 3 parishes have actually already submitted reassessment, which is really early. It's very early. But out of those 3 parishes, I'm very surprised at the number of millage rates that have stayed the same. There just has not been a significant increase or decrease, a significant change in the property values in some of those taxes to adjust those rates. They're staying the same. So I'm surprised at that. Property affected by reassessment, all property is affected by reassessment except for general obligation bonds and new or renewed taxes going on the tax rolls for that year. New or renewed taxes are not subject to reassessment simply because the tax has to be levied first in order to create an adjusted maximum millage rate. So the taxing district will have to levy that tax first, and then it will go through reassessment to create the adjusted maximum millage rate, because that levied rate is what's going to be adjusted to create the same revenue as the prior year. And technically speaking, even though you will write a proposition as a renewal or a continuation, which is fine. I mean, there's no issues with that. The AG has opined that there's no such thing as a renewal. That tax has expired, and you're going before the voters to seek a permission to reenact an expired tax. So, your renewed taxes are going to be treated as a new tax through reassessment. Even though your proposition will be written as a renewal, it's going to be treated as a new tax through reassessment. Whatever happened before that renewal is history. That tax is going to be treated as a new tax. Okay. One thing I do want to point out is each millage rate is going to be adjusted individually, and it should be levied individually. You should never, you should be recording your millage rates individually. You should be discussing them individually, and they're going to be adjusted individually. The next few slides are just some examples of some reassessment forms. These forms are submitted by all the parish assessors. They are submitted through the electronic database. Only the assessors have access to these databases. So I see we have a question come in. Let's answer that question before we get to the explanation of that reassessment form. The question is, what is the latest date the assessor should submit the 2024 parish assessment figures to the legislative auditor, thus triggering the potential in millage rates for the reassessment year? So the legislative auditor does not set a deadline for the assessors to submit these reassessment figures. So generally, in the past, we see that reassessment figures are submitted in May and June, sometimes July. With these three parishes having already submitted reassessment, I'll be honest, that's very early for them to have submitted. I don't know how they got that done early. That's great that they did that, but generally it's May or June, which is why I gave you the information that the assessors are allowed to waive that June 1st deadline. It is a good idea for you to keep in touch with your assessor to find out, like, when do you expect to submit reassessment? What do you expect our property values to do? Will there be an increase or a decrease? You need to stay in touch with your assessor for that information. 2024 is a reassessment year. More than likely, your millage rates are going to adjust. So you do not want to be adopting your millage rates before reassessment, because you will have to start over the process. So generally, it's between May and July that they are going to submit reassessment. Another question came in is, why do the retirement systems receive a payment off the total projected amount of ad valorem tax to be collected? That's a good question about why did the retirement systems receive a payment off the total projected amount of ad valorem taxes? Because it's written in the statute. That's all I can tell you is, we can only do what the state law requires, and we are required by law to create those pension reports. Those are the pension reports we talked about earlier, and they are written in the state statutes. And so that is our statutory obligation, and that's the statutory obligation of the sheriff to make those disbursements. So you would have to talk to your legislator about that. A follow-up question is, that makes the effective rate higher than what is allowed by statute. Taxing districts never collect the total due. Yeah, again, I understand that that is an issue, but that's something that is set by the legislature. It's written in the statute, so you would have to, bring that up with the legislator. We can only do what we're required to do by statute. So, yeah, that is an issue. All right, so going back with an explanation of the reassessment form. So this, if you'll look up in the top right corner, this is a 2020 reassessment form for an increase in property value. This is a reassessment form for St. George Fire Protection District number 2. You'll see toward the middle of the page, it says current millage rates, and then it says 4.0 mills, 2019 millage levied. And then it says on that same line, 4.0 mills, maximum authorized millage levied. So with those two millage rates being the same, that gives us an idea that they levied their maximum authorized millage. They are levying the highest rate possible. So then toward the middle of the page, you'll see reassessment values. And they gave us the taxable property value for 2019. And the assessor gave us the reassessed value for 2020. So with those two values, the assessor, these are the values that we got from the assessor's office, and we used those values and did a calculation to create the 2020 reassessed values, the adjusted millage rates. We used the reassessment values to do calculations to adjust the millage rates. So you can see there it was a pretty large increase of $91 million, $91.8 million. So the 4.0 mills that was levied in 2019, because there was an increase in property values, went down to 3.75 mills. So in order for St. George Fire Protection District to receive the same revenue as they did in 2019 as the prior year, they now have to levy in 2020 3.75 mills. Because there was an increase in property value, 3.75 mills would now generate the same revenue as the 4.0 mills did in 2019. However, if you look at the bottom, 3.75 mills can be levied just by following the open meetings law, because that's going to generate the same revenue. However, in order to increase revenue, they have the option to roll forward anything over the adjusted maximum millage rate of 3.75 up to the prior year's maximum of 4.0 mills. So they can roll forward from 3.75, the lower rate, up to the higher rate of 4.0 mills. Again, this was in 2020. Now, this next slide is not in your book. It's just an example, an extra one that I added. I thought it may help explain the definition whenever we talked earlier that if the levied rate and the adjusted maximum rate were different, if the levied rate and the maximum authorized rate were different, then both rates would be adjusted at reassessment. So this is an example of that. If you look under current millage rates, in 2019, they levied 6.92 mills, but the maximum authorized rate was 7.15. So the assessor entered the property values. The difference was $175,913. So in order to get the same revenue, in 2019, they levied 6.92. We did the calculation and it adjusted to 6.87. So that would bring in the same revenue as the prior year. However, the reason that how the 7.15 adjusted to 7.10, and then they can roll forward back up to 7.15. So a little explanation for this. In 2017, this was a new tax. 2017, this was a new tax that the voters approved at 7.15 mills. The district never levied from 2017, 2018, 2019. They did not levy the 7.15 mills. They levied 6.92, which is fine. So then the 2020 reassessment came around. So remember, there's no adjusted maximum millage rate until the tax goes through reassessment. So what this reassessment did is it calculated an adjusted maximum millage. The prior year's rate, the 6.92, the levied rate, adjusted to 6.87 mills to generate the same revenue. There was no adjusted maximum prior to reassessment. So it took the maximum authorized levy and adjusted it to 7.10 to create the now adjusted maximum millage. And then now the district can roll forward up to 7.15. So in 2020, this district had the option to either levy 6.87 to bring in the same revenue, levy 7.10 by following the open meetings law, or roll forward up to 7.15. Any rate over the 7.10 would require rolling forward. The next slide is a decrease in property value. Under the current millage rates for 2019, you can see this, they levied 5 mills, and their maximum authorized levy was 5 mills. The assessor entered the property values. There was a decrease of 4 million. So the 5 mills that they levied went up to 5.22. So that's what it would take for this taxing district to receive the same revenue. They would need to levy 5.22 mills. And across the bottom, under the adjusted millage rates, the third block is blank because it's a decrease in property value, and rolling forward is not an option. All they can do is levy a rate in order to receive the same revenue. And this next slide is when there's no significant change in the property values. In 2019, the school district levied 5.44 mills. The assessor entered the property values, and it was only a difference of $31,000. So that's not a significant difference there. So the millage rate stayed the same. You can see 5.44 mills all the way across. So all this district has to do for this one particular tax. Now, this is a school board. They have multiple taxes. But for this one tax, they would just have to follow the open meetings law. And we're going to have examples when we get into the actual procedures of rolling forward and not rolling forward. That may help explain these documents a little bit more. I do have examples of taxing districts and their millage documents after we go through those procedures. But I just wanted you to get an idea of how reassessment worked and the calculations of how they work. So, but right here, we're going to take a little 15-minute break. And then when we come back from the break, we'll go over those procedures and go through that. So feel free during the break to submit questions, and we'll answer those when we get back. Thank you. I might be tooting my own horn, but this one's going a lot smoother.
Good. You sound great.
Thank you. My yard guy, poor thing. My yard looks like a nightmare. It did. My backyard especially.
Ours too.
Cause I have like a push mower, and I've been trying to keep up with it.
Yeah.
So my front yard didn't look so bad.
Yeah.
But my backyard, I probably had only mowed it twice since last summer. And I texted him yesterday. I said, "Do you think you're gonna have a chance to mow my yard?" I said, "The front yard's not so bad, but the backyard is a nightmare." And anyway, he said he would cut it today. And so I said, he said, but just, he asked me to make sure it wasn't too wet. And so I said, I think it'll be okay to mow. The ditch is wet, but don't worry about it. I said, I believe you can use some extra, and I put dollar signs because the backyard is pretty bad. Sorry about that. Didn't realize it had gotten so bad. I said, but your yard, your mower can handle it, but mine cannot. So, and then he's so nice. He's like, no problem, man. He said, you're not the only one. And then he just said, I cut it, weed eat it, edge it, and blowed it. Looks much better. It was tall. And he you know him, Chance Boyne? Well, you're not from out there. He was in the military and he suffered.
PTSD?
No, he was in an explosion. His unit that he was in, they were driving and they ran over one of those, whatever they call it.
Whatever.
Yeah. And so they didn't think he was going to survive. And he was evacuated out to Walter Reed and all this stuff. I can't tell you how many surgeries. So anyway, he is out on disability. He was discharged with a disability. So he can't work like in a plant or whatever.
Wait. Are you muted?
All right, y'all ready to get back into this? So now we're going to get we did have a few questions come in over the break, so we're going to answer those while we're waiting for everybody to gather back together. So first question is, on the 2024 maximum millage report, our adjusted max mill says 0. This is our tax we voted on. Why is it 0? If it is in the adjusted max mill column, it's 0 because if 2024 is the beginning year of your tax, there is no adjusted max mill. There should be a rate in the max mill column because the tax has to go through reassessment before an adjusted maximum mill will be created. So that column should be blank. But it could also be, if all of the blanks are, say, 0, it could be that the maximum millage report was created prior to receiving your pro se verbal. So if you want to take a look at it and then give me a call later, either today or tomorrow, I can, check that for you. But if it's only the adjusted max mill column that's blank and the other column is correct, it's because it is a new tax, and this tax will have to go through reassessment to create that adjusted maximum millage rate. The next question, well, the next two questions can really actually be answered with the same answer. The first question is, will the examples of the slides shown of the roll forward calculations be available to us at a later time? And then the next question, will these Zoom meetings be available for viewing later for our board members who may want to watch them? So to get the slides and to watch the Zoom meetings, yes, the one of the workshops that were the virtual workshops, either the one we did on Tuesday or the one we're doing today, will be posted on our website either at the same place that you went to register for the workshops, or either under the educational materials, but it will be posted on our website. So you will be able to view the same information that you're viewing right now. It will be posted on our website. It may take a little while to get it out there, just because we're going to have to, do a little edit and make sure that everything is clear and recorded correctly. Then the next question is, shouldn't the minutes be approved by the board before publishing? Approval is not usually until the next month's meeting. This question has come up, and from what I remember from the attorneys saying is you need to follow what the law requires. So even if you have to put your minutes out there in draft form, you need to follow what the law requires you to do. And then if you put your minutes out there in draft form, you can also always replace them with the final version of them. But yes, you definitely need to get your minutes out there according to what the statute requires. And then even if they're not approved by the board, you can always mark them with draft and then put the final version out there when they are approved by the board. Be sure you're doing what the statute requires you to do. All very good questions. Thank you so much. So yeah, another question came in about the slides be provided when the recording is made. We're going to provide the recording exactly like it is. So the slides are part of the recording. So they will be there. Yes. All right. So with that being said, thank you for your questions. You can continue to send those in. The next part that we're going to go over are the notice requirements when you're not rolling forward. Now, let me just be clear. No one is ever required to roll forward. So I just want to state that up front. So don't let that intimidate you. But the notice requirements when you are not rolling forward, typically you're going to use this section whenever all you're going to do is levy that adjusted rate, that lower rate, to generate the same revenue as the prior year. or if you have a new or renewed tax, or if there's a decrease in property values, or if your taxing district only has a bond. So, there's many reasons why you would not roll forward. So if your district chooses not to roll forward, you would just have to go to this section and find the notice requirements. The notice requirements when you are not rolling forward is all you have to do is follow the open meetings law. It's that simple. When you are not rolling forward. So you would have to follow revised statute 4211 through 28. Patrick went over all of this in a lot of detail prior to the break, so we're just going to touch on a few things. And so we should be on page 19 of your setting millage rates book. Just remember that all public bodies, you shall give written public notice of all your public meetings no less than 24 hours prior to the public meeting, excluding weekends and legal holidays. All your votes shall be by members of the public body shall be by voice and entered into the minutes of the public meeting. You're prohibited from utilizing proxy voting procedures, secret balloting, or any other means to circumvent the intent of the open meetings law. And we know that the intent is to provide transparency. Public bodies shall, and we know that shall means must, allow a public comment period at any point in the public meeting prior to action on an agenda upon which a vote is to be taken. And the governing body may adopt reasonable rules and restrictions regarding that public comment period. I will tell you that the Legislative Auditor's Office does not know your reasonable rules and restrictions. That's up to you as the taxing districts to develop those. I would suggest that you coordinate those with your attorney and have those documented somewhere. The public body, before you take any action, the preceding officer or his designee shall, and again, shall means must, read aloud the description of each agenda item. And then we also put in there that note about if the public meeting is being held electronically, just remember that only applies if there's a gubernatorial declared disaster. And currently there are no declared disasters. So you should not be holding your public meetings electronically. Notice requirements for your public meeting. Again, written public notice no less than 24 hours prior to the public meeting. More notice is always a good idea. Just no less than 24 hours is what's required. If you can give, 2 or 3 days, that would be ideal. Just keep in mind, it excludes weekends and legal holidays. Your written notice shall include your full and complete meeting agenda. That's very important. If you're a school board, we know that you're going to do more than just adopt your millage rates. If you're a police jury, we know that you're going to do more than that. So we want your full and complete agenda. The agenda cannot be changed less than 24 hours prior to the public meeting, and you must list each agenda item with specificity. The date, time, place shall be included in your agenda. And once your agenda is complete, you must either post or publish your full meeting agenda. That's up to you how you want to do that. Most taxing districts usually just post those agendas because you have more control over that. Just remember, if you choose to publish it, you have to meet the publication deadline. Because it does have to run in the paper no less than 24 hours. You cannot take it to the paper within that 24 hours. Again, most taxing districts do choose to just post it because they have more control over that, and they can add or take away from that agenda as long as it meets that no less than 24-hour guideline. In addition to posting or publishing that agenda, you're also required to post it on the internet website if you have one. So you are required to add your agenda to your website if you have one. You may have heard me tell the story a few years ago. A lady came to me that her district had a website, but they haven't used it in years. And so my question to her was, if I go out and pulled up the website right now. Could I see it? And she said, well, yeah, but the information you see would be out of date. So, but you still have a website. So you have to post your agendas to that website or either take it down. So anyway, so if you have a website, whether it's current or not, by law, you're supposed to be publishing your agendas to that website. We had a question Tuesday about, well, where do we post our agendas on our website? It could, I know larger taxing districts, police juries, parish governments, school boards, they have a link, an icon that says open meetings or public meetings, and they just list them all there with a link to the current agenda. But it's up to you how you do that, but you should be posting your agendas on your website if you have one. Additional agenda requirements, that these would be during your actual meeting. Again, the presiding officer is required to read aloud each agenda item, the description of each agenda item. A public comment period must be allowed. Remember, as a school board, you're required to stop immediately before each agenda item. Other taxing districts, they can hold their public comment period either immediately before each agenda items, or they can have one comment period prior at the beginning of the meeting. General notice requirements. You want your agenda to be clear because, the open meetings, all the purpose of it is to provide as much transparency as possible. You want to use action verbs. Again, you want to provide transparency. So you want to adopt your millage rates or levy your millage rates, fix your levy rates, your millage rates. If you are an entity that your charter or your bylaws require that use of that word consider or discuss, we will require you to follow up with an action verb, consider and adopt, or consider and levy. You could even put two different agenda items. One item could be to consider and follow up with a second item to adopt, but you must show action on your agenda, on your action verbs on your millage adoption. So adopt millage rates. The date of posting and time must be shown on there. So whatever date you post your agenda, you can either handwrite that or type it on your agenda just to show us that you did post it within the requirements of the law. Your millage adoption must take place in a public meeting. That's very important. You might want to highlight that. When you roll forward, you're required to have a public hearing and a public meeting, but your millage adoption will always take place in a public meeting. One thing, if you do choose to publish your agenda, again, most people just choose to post it, but if you choose to publish it, you will have to provide the tear sheet where you published it. So again, another reason you may want to just post it. We ask you that if you have letterhead stationery to use that, don't go out and order it or buy it. It's not necessary. But if you have it, it does provide more information. It is more professional. But it's not required by no means. But we do ask that you use that if you have that when you're posting these agendas. Okay. So that's your agenda. And again, you just want to make sure it's as clear as possible. It provides as much transparency as possible. The next section is the documents that you're going to turn into the assessor when you are not rolling forward. You're going to submit these to the assessor, and then the assessor will now submit them electronically through their secured site to the legislative auditor. The assessor is the only people, their office, that has access to this secured site. It's not a public site. Only the assessor has access to it. You're going to submit the notice of public meeting, which is your full meeting agenda, one resolution or ordinance, the affidavit, and a notary data sheet. The requirements for the notice of public meeting, again, we want the complete meeting agenda. Don't just send us the page that has the millage adoption. We want the full meeting agenda. The resolution or ordinance, if your charter or your bylaws require that you use an ordinance, please use an ordinance, as long as it includes the whole entire vote count, yays, nays, absent, and abstained. We want you to use that ordinance. These documents, the notice of public meeting and a resolution, there is a sample form available on our website that you are more than welcome to use. They are sample forms. However, the affidavit is not a sample form. You are required to use the legislative auditor's affidavit. The requirements for the resolution, like when you're not rolling forward, only one is required. It only requires a simple majority vote of the members that are present. However, remember, Patrick told you that a quorum is required even to hold a meeting. So you will have to have a simple majority of the members that are present. The resolution or ordinance must be signed by an authorized signer. We don't know, the legislative auditor's office does not know who are your authorized signers. That's up to you to have those documented in your office somewhere. We realize that personnel and staff, there's a turnover. So you need to make sure that that information is being updated as staff and personnel is changing, or as board members are changing. You need to make sure that the authorized signers, that information is being updated as well. Your resolution or ordinance must show the adoption date, and that adoption date must correspond with the public meeting date that's shown on your agenda. Your resolution or ordinance must also show a complete vote count, yays, nays, absent, and abstained. And even though there may be no one abstaining or there may be no one voting nay, we ask that you put a 0 there or the word none there, because we don't know how many seats make up your board. So that way we can be assured that every seat of your board has been accounted for. So we ask that every voting option has some type of information filled in, whether it be 0 or the word none, and then the actual vote count. Also, it needs to adopt a specific millage rate, and each millage rate will be shown individually. Don't combine all of your millage rates into one total. They need to be shown individually. And if the vote count is the same for all millage rates, you can record them on one resolution or one ordinance. But again, if you think that the vote count is going to be different per millage rate, or if you get into your public meeting and one of your members wants to change your rate, of course, you're going to have a different resolution or a different ordinance because the vote count will be different. That's strictly up to you if you want to do one resolution or one ordinance if the vote count is the same. The requirements for the affidavit, again, that is a document that is required by the legislative auditor, and you are required to use our form that's available on our website. You want to go out there and check annually for the current affidavit. It does change quite often as the statutes change. You want to go out there and change it and check it. It is a sworn statement by the legislative auditor's office to be assured that all of the requirements have been met. So if you are the affiant signing that affidavit, you want to be asking questions about this. Was this notice done? Was this posted in a timely manner? You want to be asking questions about that. The blanks on the affidavit are describing the public meeting. So the information on the affidavit should correspond with the information on your notice of public meeting. And then the name of the affiant must be set forth on the affidavit. And of course, the affiant signature is required, and the affiant must sign in the presence of a notary. So once in a while, we'll get an affidavit that has been signed by a notary, but the affiant has not signed. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but the notary should not be even signing that affidavit without the affiant being present. So you want to be sure that you are signing the affidavit in the presence of the notary. So while you're there, you want to be sure that you're checking these affidavits on the Secretary of State's website and that they're in good standing. And so while you're checking it, you might as well just print that form out and go ahead and turn it in with your documents so that we won't have to check it and run the risk that your notary has been suspended for some reason or other, that they could have, just simply failed to submit a document or something. But you want to check to make sure that your notaries are in good standing with the Secretary of State's office. Before we go to the sample forms, I see we have a couple of questions that have come in. Let's see. One question is, what is considered substantial change in reassessment value? Well, that's hard to say what's considered substantial change in reassessment value. It just depends, because reassessment it involves rounding. So it just depends on, where the millage rates are at and what the property values are at. Like the one we saw before the break, that was 31,000. But it could be more or less. That would be hard to say. We would just have to look at each individual tax and the property values on a case by case basis. You really can't say on an overall, you can't say what would be considered a substantial change in reassessment. All right. So the next slides are some examples of taxing district that did not roll forward. So this is, if you'll remember before the break, the slide that had 5.44 all over it. So this is Tensas Parish School Board. This is a screenshot of the millage database that I work in every day. So I wanted to put this here so you would understand what we look at and what we work with. So at the top of this screenshot, you can see to the left, at the top, this is just general information. We get the most of this information off of the proce verbals that you submit to us, to be honest. So again, that's another reason why we need those proce verbals to be as accurate as possible. So to the top on the left, you see where I wrote original constitutional authorization, levy 5 mills. And then toward the right of the screen, or to my right, millage type, there's a blue arrow and it says constitutional. So for Tensas Parish School Board, this was a tax that was allowed by the state constitution back years ago. Probably the current constitution was written in 1974. This constitutional tax was probably written before that in the previous constitution. And back then it was originally for 5 mills. So, but you can see now they're levying 5.44 since 2018. There has been a decrease in property value back years ago at some point that pushed this rate up to 5.44. It has stayed at 5.44 since then. Tensas Parish has not experienced a significant change in their property values. It has either been a decrease in property value or not a significant change in property value. So their rates have stayed at 5.44 on this one tax. So in order to levy it, this is the millage documents for Tensas Parish School Board. Now this is their millage documents for 2023. You can see if you've been around this the millage documents for any length of time, you probably have gotten your millage documents back from me and they've had little check marks on them, or they may have had little notes sent back on them. Well, you can tell that this one does not. It's because in 2023, the assessors started submitting your millage documents online through their secured database. So now everything is being done electronically. So this was their school for the school district. They posted on September the 7th, and they gave date, time, and place of the public meeting. And then under new business, they put adopt the millage rates for 2023. And then they listed them out. They're not required to list them out there, but they did. That's wonderful. They provided transparency to the taxpayers reading this notice. That's wonderful. But it's not required. They could have just put adopt the millage rates for 2023. They provided more transparency, and I'm all about that, but that's not required. And then this is the second page of their agenda. So they submitted their full meeting agenda like they were required to do. And this is their affidavit that they did get off of our website. Again, I strongly suggest that you check our website annually for this affidavit. It does change as the statutes change. It is updated. This information corresponds with the information that was on their notice of public meeting. This is the notary data sheet that they pulled off of the Secretary of State's website. Toward the middle of the page where it says status, you can tell that their notary was active. And this is their resolution. And these rates correspond with the rates that were on their notice of public meeting. They all were correct. They match what was on in the database and was on the reassessment forms. And then you can see their vote count. They use names for their vote count, and then they use none by nays and abstained. You're not required to use names. You can use numbers if you choose to, and then also use zeros instead of none. But this is a complete resolution, and it looks great. Now I added this in there so you can see now that the assessors are using their secured site to submit millage documents, this is what the assessors receive through the secured site electronically, that once a taxing district has submitted all of their documents necessary to complete the package, and it has been reviewed and approved by this office, the assessors get this back through their database, through their secured site. And this is the school district telling the assessor the school district submitted not rolling forward documents and that the package has been accepted, meaning we're done with the school board, it's been accepted, the millage rates have been recorded, we can move on to the next taxing district. So this is an example of a decrease in property value. And this is for Fire Protection District number 1 in DeSoto Parish. So if you'll look up at the top of the slide, you can see onto my left, the original voter authorization was 5 mills. So that's what was in the proposition that the voters saw when they went to the ballot. They saw 5 mills in that proposition. It was in an election held in October of 2017. And the millage type, it was a voter approved tax. So originally it was at 5 mills. That was in 2019. So if you look at the bottom of the slide where it says the slot year 2019, you can see under the max mill column, it was at 5 mills. There's no adjusted max because it's not been through reassessment. And under the authorized rate column, so that is the levied column, that's what the fire district approved to go on the tax roll, was 5 mills. So 2020 was the statewide reassessment. That 5 mills that they levied, because there was a decrease in property value, adjusted to 5.22 mills. So because there was a decrease in property value, that millage rate went higher to bring in the same revenue as 5.22. But in 2020 up through 2023, they chose just to continue to levy the 5 mills. Now, reassessment has not occurred, it has not been submitted in DeSoto Parish yet, so we're not sure what will happen to the 5.22 in 2024. We'll have to wait and see how that is affected. This is their notice of public meeting for 2023. They posted it on May 17th at 12 o'clock for a meeting held May 18th, date, time, and place. And then under new business, they put adopt millage rates. Now, again, we encourage you to use more time, more than one day, but they posted at 12 for a 4 p.m. public meeting. They met the requirement of the law, so we accepted it. This is the affidavit. They just got it off of our website. This information corresponds with the information on their notice of public meeting. And this is their notary data sheet. They have an ex officio notary, and that ex officio notary is specifically for the fire district, which is fine. You can use the ex officio notary as long as they are for your district only. And then this is their resolution. Again, they use names under the vote count, and then they put 0 by the nays and abstained. And then here is the screenshot that we sent back to the assessor, telling them that the millage documents for Fire Protection District number 1 have been approved. There's nothing else that needs to be done for Fire District 1. All right, so those are the examples for Fire District for the not rolling forward millage documents. When you're not rolling forward, you just have to follow the open meetings law. All right, so now we'll move on to when you are rolling forward. When you are rolling forward, it takes a little bit more, but people have done it. And after they do it, they say, well, you know, we could have done that. You know, that wasn't so bad after all. But it does take a little bit more effort, but, you know, we'll help you walk through it. If you have questions, I don't want you to worry about it, but if you have questions, give us a call. But remember, there is timelines involved, so you need to reach out to us and call us with plenty of time, and you know, to get those answered and give you the time that you need to get that fixed and to get it accomplished. Okay. Remember that your roll forward only occurs when there is an increase in property value, and it adjusts the millage rates downward, and that downward adjustment will generate the same revenue. And the taxing district, that's you as the taxing body, wants to roll back up to the prior year's maximum, which is also known as the maximum authorized millage. So that's the higher rate to generate more revenue. So just keep in mind, when you generate more revenue, you are increasing taxes. At one point or the other, you probably will get that question from someone. How are you rolling forward? You are increasing taxes, which by the state constitution, you are allowed to do that because you are receiving more revenue. When you roll forward, remember a public hearing is required and a public meeting. They're not the same thing in this situation. A public hearing is required and a public meeting, and it's not to be confused with the public comment period. In this case, the public hearing is not the public comment period. Whenever you roll forward, Article 7, Section 23C requires 2 separate publications no less than 30 days before the public hearing. So the state constitution requires 2 separate publications no less than 30 days before your public hearing. You want to highlight that, no less than 30 days before your public hearing. 90 days is much better. 60 days is okay, but don't give yourself just 30 days because you don't know what the schedule of the newspaper is. Publication shall include the date, time, place, and subject matter of the public hearing, and publication shall be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in another newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. So your publications must be published twice on 2 separate days in your official journal. So you know you have to publish at least twice on 2 separate days when you're rolling forward. But you also have to check other papers that may have a larger circulation in your area. And if they have a larger circulation, you're also required to publish twice in those papers. So you're either going to publish twice or you're going to publish 4 times. And there has to be at least 30 days between the last publication and your public hearing. Again, more time is better. Revised Statute 47-1705B, and this is important. You want to highlight this as well. Public hearings will be held in accordance with the open meetings law. So we learned in the not rolling forward section, and we learned from Patrick, the open meetings law requires that a full meeting agenda be posted or published. So now we're learning that 47-1705B requires a full public hearing agenda be provided. That's very important. Revised Statute 47-1705B. It also requires additional notice requirements for increasing millage rates. They exclude, they exempt Rapides parish, apply to all parishes except Rapides parish. I don't know how Rapides got exempt. Their legislator, I guess, went to the Capitol and had them exempt. Publication shall contain a statement that the tax recipient body intends to consider levying additional or increased millage rates without further voter approval. That is verbatim from the law. So your publications have to contain that statement without further voter approval. Revised Statute 47-1705B also requires that your publication be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in a newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. So again, you have to check these circulation numbers if there's a paper with a larger circulation number. The second publication in the official journal and in the paper with a larger circulation has to have at least 30 days from the date of that second publication. So from that last publication, there has to be no less than 30 days between it and the public hearing. I cannot emphasize enough that more than 30 days is better. Because like we said before, there's no gray area in the law. We cannot waive their requirements. 28 or 29 days is not 30 days. So you need to be careful when you're counting these days. The publication requirements, they shall include placement in a prominent section of the newspaper. So you need to be sure, that your placement of these ads are being done in a prominent section. However, placement cannot be, and it cannot be in the classified advertisements or the public notice section of the newspaper. They must be formatted in a box with a bolded outline, a size of not less than 2 by 4 inches, and printed in a box with a bold-faced type. These are very specific guidelines, very specific formatting. So again, another reason why you want to give yourself plenty enough time to go out and check these ads to be sure that the newspaper is formatting them correctly. Again, there's no gray area, and while it's unfortunate, newspapers make mistakes, and so that would cause your roll forward to fail. We could not certify that roll forward. So you want to be able to check those ads and rerun them if there's an error with the newspaper. One thing that you also want to do is make sure that when you're scheduling these public hearings and public meetings, that your locations are consistent. Don't advertise your public hearing in your 2 by 4 publications at one place and then move it once you get ready to hold your public meeting. Your locations must be consistent on all your notices, all your upcoming notices. Then going on, it says publication charges by the official journal shall not be in excess of charges for regular commercial advertising. We understand that this is very expensive, but that's something that will have to be between the taxing districts and the newspaper. We don't know what are regular commercial advertising, so that's something that you'll have to work out with the newspaper. And then failure to timely publish renders the millage null, void, and of no effect. That is written in the law. That statement is written in the law, but we don't want that to cause you to panic. Some people, they worry that if we can't certify their roll forward, that means that they won't get any millage at all. What that means is the increase will not be certified. It would just revert back to that adjusted millage rate, which would generate the same revenue as the prior year. And if there's enough time left in the tax year, The legislative auditor's office does not have any problem with you starting the roll forward over, but that's a conversation you would have to have with the assessor's office, depending on their timeline. And then next, you'll see a sample publication that we have prepared. I told one of the girls that's working with me, I told her, I said, I guess I could have updated the sample publication. I apologize. This was done in May of 21. I should have updated it, made it more current for this year. I apologize. But it applies. It also applies. It's still a good outline. All the laws are still met. The tax recipient body shall provide the assessor the date, time, and place of the pending public hearing. So we're still talking about the public hearing. The assessor is required to maintain a list of all pending hearings in their parish, and then they can choose whether to publish those hearings on their website. In addition to that 2x4 publication, the tax recipient body shall issue a press release to newspapers, and you'll see that that's plural. In this law, the statutes has it as being plural. So you need to issue that press release to more than one newspaper with substantial distribution and to area broadcast media. So you're required to issue a press release to newspapers and to area broadcast media. Now, you're required to issue the press release. Whether the newspaper and the broadcast media actually air it or publish it, that's on them. So as Joanne, because I always err on the side of caution, I strongly encourage you to get some type of confirmation that you have done what you're required to do by law. Whether you take it there and get someone to initial it, if you get some type of return receipt mailed to you, a return receipt is not required by law, but that's just me making that suggestion to you that you've done what you're required to do by law. On the first day of publication, occurring no less than 30 days before the public hearing, you're also required to post the notice of public hearing on your internet website if you have one. So in addition to the publication and the press releases, you are required to post that notice on your website if you have one, and leave it there until action has been taken on the roll forward. Your 2x4 publications to consider rolling forward without further voter approval, they shall contain some dollar amounts. That one of the dollar amounts would be an estimate of the amount of tax revenues to be collected in the next tax year from the increased millage as compared to the amount of the tax revenue for the current year, and the amount of increase in taxes attributable to the increase, to the millage increase. Now, this is going to be two different tax amounts. The first amount will be the amount that you expect to collect overall. It's going to be your total amount that you expect to collect. The second amount would be the amount attributable to the increase. So the difference from what you received the prior year as to what you expect to receive from the roll forward. It's going to be the difference. What will the roll forward bring in versus if you had not rolled forward? Now, these dollar amounts, it's up to the taxing districts to calculate these amounts. What you will do is get the property values from the assessor, and you will have the millage rates from the assessor, and you will do the calculation. You'll use a calculation from the adjusted millage rate, and you'll use a calculation from the maximum millage rate. So you'll get those rates and those values, and you'll do those calculations. You might want to make a note that it says an estimated amount. So you won't ever get it down to the penny, but you do want to get as close as you can. Then going on, for purposes of the internet publication only, the notice shall contain a, so for your internet, the notice shall contain a recitation of the current budget of the taxing authority. So in addition, you are required to post a recitation of your current budget on your website. A lot of the larger taxing districts probably already have that out there, a link to their current budget. If you don't, you probably need to figure that out, how to get like a line item out there or some type of summary to your current budget if you're going to roll forward and you have a website. Revised statute 47-1705.1. This is the this is the statute that applies only to St. Tammany Parish. If it's a taxing district within St. Tammany Parish and they plan to roll forward, they are required to coordinate that with the parish governing authority. Revised Statute 47-1705B2F. It does provide some things for a subsequent hearing and subsequent meeting. It provides provisions for those. If the public hearing to consider a levying additional or increased millages is canceled or postponed. So if the public hearing or public meeting that you have advertised for some reason is canceled or postponed, or if the proposal was considered at the public hearing without action or vote. So you want to highlight that statement, without action or vote. That's very important. Then any future hearing to consider such proposal. You also want to highlight that such proposal shall be advertised and publicized, except that no newspaper advertisement shall be required. So if you get to it's time for your public hearing, if something has come up, say a hurricane has come up and you cannot meet for your public hearing or public meeting, this provides those provisions that allow you to postpone your public hearing. Now, someone needs to be there to say, because of whatever situation, we are going to postpone this public hearing until whatever date. You need to provide the date. But you have to table the whole proposal. The 19th JDC and the Court of Appeals has ruled that the entire roll forward process from the first publication all the way through the final adoption is one proposal. So you cannot allow any action at all from your first publication to your final adoption. No action or vote can be taken. You have to table the entire thing, and then you can hold a subsequent public hearing or public meeting. But someone needs to be there at that original public hearing to let the people that may show up know that it has been rescheduled to a particular date. If you do have to reschedule, you do not have to do those 2x4 tear sheets again. You do not have to follow that, but you do have to provide the assessor with the new pending public hearing date, and the assessor has to maintain that date, and then you as the taxing district have to issue another press release. Then in addition to all of that, to give notice of your public hearing, up to that point we've been talking about your public hearing, you still have to follow the open meetings law. So that's revised statute 4211 through 28. You still have to provide the open meetings law. Written notice no less than 24 hours, excluding weekends and legal holidays before your public hearing. And written notice no less than 24 hours, excluding weekends and legal holidays before your public meeting. So again, remember, you have to give an agenda for your public hearing and your public meeting. So that's revised statute 47-1705B requires that you give legal notice, you give notice with an agenda of your public hearing and your public meeting. If you post it all at the same time, typically your public hearing is immediately before your public meeting on the same date. Public bodies are prohibited from utilizing any manner proxy voting. We've gone through all this before. We're just going to touch on it again. Again, public bodies are required to provide that public comment period in your public meeting. Don't get the public comment period confused with your public hearing. Notice of requirements for your public hearing. Remember that you must publish your written public notice with that specific formatting and language twice in your official journal and twice in a newspaper with a larger circulation no less than 30 days before your public hearing. Written public notice no less than 24 hours before your public hearing. So that's your agenda. You're going to publish your 2x4 ads no less than 30 days. You're going to post your public hearing agenda no less than 24 hours. Again, that agenda is going to be just like your public meeting, include date, time, place, and an agenda item. Your notice of public meeting, we've gone over that in detail. You're going to include your full agenda notice, your date, time, place for your meeting, an agenda for your public meeting. So that is the notice requirements for your public hearing and your public meeting whenever you're rolling forward. The documents you're going to turn in whenever you roll forward. Now this is the second update for the February book. We're going to go over these in detail, but the February book has these applicable laws wrote out in them. The January book does not has this screen added to it. We're still going to go over the laws, and the January book reviews the laws in detail, but this screen right here, this slide, is included in the February book. Whenever you're rolling forward, the documents that you're going to turn in is Article 7, Section 23C of the Constitution, 2/3 vote of the total membership of the taxing authority without further voter approval. So remember, total membership includes the vacant seats. Revised Statute 47-1705B1A. Again, it also requires 2/3 vote of the total membership. Revised Statute 47-1705B2A requires an ordinance to set forth and designate the adjusted millage rate. So that's an ordinance or resolution that's going to set forth and designate that lower rate. And Revised Statute 47-1705B2B requires a second ordinance or resolution which shall set forth and designate not only the increased millage rate, but also the adjusted millage rate. So that second ordinance is going to set forth the lower rate and the increased rate. Okay, we have a couple of questions that have come in. We'll stop right here and answer those before we get into detail about the requirements for the documents. The first question is 30 calendar days or 30 working days? For your 2x4 ads only your 2x4 ads, it's 30 calendar days. The agenda excludes weekends and legal holidays, but for the 2x4 publications, it's calendar days. The next question is, can the public hearing be part of a monthly board meeting? The public hearing is separate from a meeting. Remember that. The public hearing is separate from a meeting. You have to have a public hearing and you have to give an agenda for your public hearing. And then you have to have an agenda for your public meeting. So a public hearing is separate from your public hearing is separate from your public meeting. Okay, let's get going. So now we're going to talk about the documents that you're going to submit to the assessor, who will then forward them to our office via their secured site. The documents you're going to turn in is the notice of public hearing, which includes that full hearing agenda. You're going to submit the notice of public meeting, which includes the full meeting agenda, 2 ordinances or resolutions, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. All other documents you're going to keep in your file, in your office, in case someone comes to question you about it. You know, for example, that press release, you're going to keep a copy of that. And if you did get a confirmation, that would be a good place to keep that. What you confirm you did what you were required to do by law. One thing you'll see here that you're not required to turn in are those tear sheets where you did those 2x4 ads. You still have to do them. You're still required by law to do them. And they will become an auditing issue. By law, I can request those at any point. And beginning this year, I will be randomly requesting those from some taxing districts. I will be just randomly calling and asking for those from some taxing districts. That's something that when we went electronically, we updated the affidavit. So in a few minutes, you'll see the updated affidavit. So again, if you are the affiant, you want to be checking this information against the actual documentation and see proof where all these requirements have been met. Because if any question comes up, we're going to come back to you and say, show me where this was done. Show me these 2x4 publications. Show me this press release. All of this stuff is on the affidavit, and it is documented on what dates, what section. It's very detail oriented. So if you are the affiant, you want to be the one checking that this stuff was done. Okay. The requirements for the resolution or the ordinance, now there are two required. The first resolution requires a simple majority vote. It must set forth and designate the adjusted millage rate determined by reassessment. So that first resolution or ordinance is going to be the lower rate. It will be the resolution or ordinance that generates the same revenue as the prior year. So if for some reason we could not certify your roll forward, we would revert back to that first resolution or ordinance that has the adjusted millage rate on it. The second resolution or ordinance requires 2/3 vote of the total membership of the board. Even if they're vacant seats, 2/3 vote of the total membership of the board. It must set forth and designate the adjusted millage rate and the increased millage rate. So it's going to have the same rate that was on the first resolution, and it's also going to have the increased rate that you want to be applied to the tax bills. Both resolutions must be signed by an authorized person. It must show the date of adoption and have a complete vote count. The requirements for the affidavit, again, you must use our affidavit and it cannot be changed. That affidavit is designed by our legal team here, and it's to assure the legislative auditor that all of these roll forward requirements have been met. The affiant is attesting that all the notice requirements have been met. The blanks on there before the roll forward occurred statement are describing the open meetings law. The ones after are describing the public hearing. At the roll forward occurred, there's a statement on it that says roll forward occurred, yes or no. If once you got to your public meeting and your roll forward passed, your board voted in favor of the roll forward, you're going to mark yes. And that tells us that we need to be checking all of the items below that statement. If you go in there into your board meeting and your board votes down your roll forward, you're going to mark no. And that tells us we don't need to worry about the items below that statement. We just need to check the open meetings law. Then going on down, again, the affiant needs to sign that affidavit and be sure that all those notice requirements were met. And then again, sign in front of the affidavit, sign in front of the notary, and make sure that your notary is in good standing. So these next few slides are examples of a roll forward. So this is an increase in property value. On this one, I had to jump back to 2020, just simply because that was the last statewide reassessment year. I will have a 2024 coming up shortly. So this is a 2020 for St. George Fire Protection District number 2. That's here in Baton Rouge. So if you look down toward the middle of the screen, it is where the red arrow is, that is the 2020 slot year. And you can see under the maximum meal column, it is 4 meals, and then the adjusted maximum is 3.7 meals. And then under the authorized rate column is 4 meals. So you may remember back before the break, we went over a slide that had these same rates on it. It was for St. George. And so they did roll forward in 2020, which was the year of reassessment. You're not required to roll forward in the year of reassessment. Most taxing districts do, just in order to do that, because keep in mind, if you don't roll forward prior to the next reassessment, it doesn't say the next statewide reassessment. It says prior to the next reassessment, whenever that will occur, you will lose that maximum millage rate. So if they had not rolled forward prior to 2024, they would have lost that 4 meals. But they actually did roll forward in the year of, so they were fine. So this is for St. George. They rolled forward to secure that 4 meals in 2023. I mean, I'm sorry, they rolled forward in 2020. So this is a proof of publication where they roll forward. This is from The Advocate, which is a newspaper here in Baton Rouge. They published their run date, which is their publication date, on August the 12th and August 13th. So you can run on consecutive days. They just have to be separate days. And then this is a copy of their tear sheet. I had to do some cut and paste here to get it to fit on my screen, but you get the idea of what it looks like. They published on August the 12th for a public hearing, on August the 12th for a public hearing that was being held on September the 24th. So they gave themselves a few extra days. But this is their 2x4 ad. Now they put that little chart in there for their dollar amounts. That's not required. It's up to you how you want to do that. Some taxing districts combine all their totals, and some other taxing districts just put a little chart in there like this. So they did their publication, and this is their agenda for their public hearing. They published on September 22nd for a public hearing to be held on September 24th, and they gave the time and the place of their public hearing. Again, it was very clear as to what they were doing, and they gave an agenda for their public hearing. You're required to have an agenda item for your public hearing. Then they adjourned their public hearing and went straight into their public meeting. They gave date, time, place for their public meeting. Then under new business, down toward the bottom, you see items number 1 and item number 2, which just follows the same information as the law does. Adopt the adjusted millage rate. Item 2, adopt the adjusted millage rate and a rate not to exceed the maximum authorized rate. Then they did have their meeting, and this is their first resolution. We're not really concerned about this first paragraph, this first page, because it's just more descriptive information. The second page is where it really gets into the legalese, if you'd say. But you can see this adopts their adjusted millage rates. They also gave the rates for the prior year, the maximum authorized rates, but we weren't concerned with that. They were just giving that information, I guess, for the readers. But for our purposes, they adopted the adjusted rates for 2020. Here's their vote count, which was correct. And here's their sign page with an authorized signer. Then here's their second resolution. Again, this is just provides summary information. And here's the page that actually gets into their roll forward. You can see where they said increase roll forward. Has their adjusted rate in the third column, has their increase rate in the fourth column. It just continues on and was adopted by no less than 2/3 vote. Has their vote count, and then their authorized signer. Now this is an older affidavit. I do have a newer affidavit on the next example. This is an older affidavit, but this was a good, at the time, this was their good affidavit. And they signed it in front of the notary. And this is his notary data sheet. Now this I put up here just simply because I wanted you to see an example of when a taxing district lost their maximum. Now, it's not, I don't want that to be a misconception. It's not a bad thing to lose your maximum millage. You should really be comparing that to your budget needs. A taxing district should always determine their millage rates based off of their budget. But this is an example from Washington Parish for Bogalusa City Schools. Now, this is one that has submitted reassessment for this year, 2024. So if you look toward the middle of the page, you can see I put green arrows by the 2020 slot year. Their maximum millage was 6.43, and their adjusted maximum mill was 6.41. And then under the authorized rate column, which is the levied column, it's what the school board chose to levy, was 6.41. They levied that from 6.41 from 2020 all the way through 2023. Well, then the assessor submitted the values for 2024, and so now they have lost the 6.43 mills, and 6.41 became their maximum. And the levied rate, the levied 6.41 adjusted to 6.40 because there was an increase in property value, and that's what it will take for them to get the same revenue as last year. So again, every taxing district should review their budget needs and decide, whether they need to roll forward or not. Now, this is an example of a multi-parish taxing district. I get questions about multi-parishes quite often, so I wanted to put this in there. A multi-parish, it pretty much runs the same as a single parish taxing district, only that it has to wait for multiple parishes to submit their property values. A multi-parish, they have to choose an official journal, just like a single parish. They have a central office, a central location, just like a single parish taxing district would. It's just they have properties that are spread across multiple parishes that submit values, and they have to wait for those separate assessors to submit values before we can adjust the millage rates. So this is a Chafalaya Basin levy district. In 2019, their rate was 4.04 mills. So we had to wait for all of these parishes to submit their property values before we could adjust the 2020 millage rate. And when they did, their 4.04 mills adjusted down to 4.01 in order for them to get the same revenue. And they had the option to roll back up to 4.04. And they did. They rolled forward in 2023. But I want you just to keep in mind, they have not been adjusted for the 2024 reassessment yet. So that's why the numbers in the 2024 slot year are still the same. It will be adjusted, but let's stick to the 2020 slot year and the 2023 slot year. So in 2020, they levied 4.01 under the authorized rate column through 2022, and then they rolled forward in 2023 and levied 4.04. So they did successfully roll forward in 2023. So here are their millage documents for 2023. Again, all the assessors had to submit a copy of the millage documents for Chafalaya Basin Levy District because it goes on the tax roll for each one of those parishes. So the levy district, they posted this agenda June 2nd for a public hearing for June 7th. You can see they have an agenda item for their public hearing, which is great. That's what's required by law. They gave a perfect example. They gave clear information to the reader what was going to happen in that public hearing. They adjourned the public hearing and they opened up their public meeting. Under new business, you see item 1 is adopt the adjusted rate. Item 2 is set forth the adjusted rate and roll forward. So they did exactly what was required by the law. This is the second page of their agenda. This is the current affidavit. So if you look down under that roll forward occurred statement, you see items number 1 and items number 2. Now you have to, the affiant, if you're the affiant, you want to be checking this. You have to fill in the name of your paper and the dates that it was published. If you have a paper with a larger circulation, you have to fill that in on item number 2. And then there's things for you to fill in on items 5 and 6 if you have a website, on items number 8, and item number 9 and number 10 and 11. So you want to be sure that if you're the affiant, you're checking this information. And here's their notary data sheet. Here's their first resolution where they're adopting 4.01 mills as their adjusted rate to bring in the same revenue. And it has a vote count. Here's resolution number 2 where it adopts the adjusted rate and the increased rate of 4.04 and their vote count. And here's where we sent this back, their notice back to the assessor that their package was accepted. Atchafalaya Basin, their roll forward passed and it was accepted, and their millage rate was recorded in the database. So every assessor within that has something to do with Atchafalaya Basin Levy District submitted these same millage documents, and they all got back this same information that the millage documents for the levy district were acceptable, and we recorded that millage rate. See, one other question came in. So the question is, it says your current example still use board meeting and not public hearing. So I'm not sure of the question there, but whenever you're rolling forward, your public hearing, whenever you're rolling forward, your public hearing has to be outside of your public meeting. Now, it should be on the same date. It's not required that it's on the same date, but it's always best, it's suggested that it's on the same date. But when you're rolling forward, your public hearing should be outside of your board meeting. Your public hearing, when you're rolling forward, should be outside of your public meeting. A public hearing is not the same as a public comment period in this case. So when you're rolling forward, your public hearing is separate. It's a separate event than your public meeting, than your board meeting. Public hearing is a separate event when you're rolling forward. And I hope that answers your question. If not, you can give me a call and we can discuss that. All right, so the next thing we're going to go over, and please continue to submit your questions. These are all great questions. So the next thing we're going to go over are the different types of ad valorem questions. Types of ad valorem taxes, excuse me. And I'm sure you all know what they are, but we'll just review them real quick. They're constitutional, statutory, and voter approved. Constitutional, those are just those that are allowed by the state constitution. And just keep in mind that all ad valorem taxes are subject to reassessment. They all have been adjusted by reassessment, okay? So constitutional taxes, they're just that. They are provided by the state constitution. We looked at one in one of the examples earlier that it was originally authorized at 5 mills, but now it's at 5.44. That's because of reassessment. Article 6, Section 27A of the Constitution allows some municipalities to levy 7 mills. Article 6, Section 26A allows governing authorities to levy 4 mills. School boards are allowed to levy 5 mills. But just because the Constitution originally allowed that does not mean they're at that now. They are either higher or lower than that because of reassessment. Statutory millages, they're similar to constitutional millages, except they're provided for through the legislature. They did not go necessarily before the vote of people. However, statutory millages generally have some type of stipulation to go with them, some type of requirement. And one of those requirements is usually that you seek voter approval. The legislature will say, we approve this millage, we approve this tax after you seek approval of the electors within that area. So usually a vote of the people is one of the stipulations of a statutory millage. And voter approval millage rates, I'm sure you know what they are. They all go before the voters, and they usually are pretty specific in their the propositions on those. They go before the bond commission and the Secretary of State's office for your propositions to be approved. The propositions are usually very specific with a millage rate to be levied. The purpose of the tax is usually there. They usually have a term, a voter, a beginning year and an ending year. Some of them have a recitation of the dollars that will be collected in the first year. Some of them will have, if this tax is being levied in lieu of a different tax. That's just up to you and your bonding attorney how to write that, but some of them get pretty specific on there. After the tax passes and the taxing district will canvass or promulgate the election results. Remember, you are required to create that prosse verbal that we've talked about in detail here. So then the next thing we're going to talk about is the maximum millage reports. Just keep in mind that the maximum millage reports, they are out there for informational purposes only. They are not an official report. The Legislative Auditor's Office is not mandated to create those reports, but we feel like it's important to provide you with that information. So if you see any information on there that you feel like is in error, please contact us. They do show rates for the parish taxes and the municipalities. They're on our website now. However, the reports that are on the public page, they're only updated once a year. The reports that are on the assessor secured site, they update with our database. So the reports, if you see something that's on the public page and you say, well, that doesn't look exactly right, you can always give me a call or contact your assessor, and we can look at our side of the report and find out if maybe the public page just doesn't have the most current information. We can always check that out for you. That's not a problem at all. But the maximum millage reports are out there on the site right now. So, but this is an example of what the maximum millage report will look like. Just keep in mind that the rates shown on the maximum millage reports will be adjusted by the 2024 reassessment. Most parishes have not submitted that yet. Only 3 of them have. So you want to keep that in mind. You should not be adopting your millage rates based off of the reports that are on our website. You should wait until the assessors contact you. So anyway, if you look at the report on your screen, you'll see the millage key. There's a millage key that starts with 1037. That indicates that that is a parish tax. Any millage key that starts with the number 1 indicates that that is a parish tax. If you look toward the bottom of that page, you'll see something, a millage key underlined with a 5119. A millage key that starts with a 5, that indicates that that is a municipal tax. So those are the parish and the municipal taxes shown. And then it gives you a description of that tax and then the purpose code. There's also a legend available on our website that will give you the definitions for those codes to explain what those codes mean. Under the type column, the C just means it's a constitutional tax, the V means it's a voter approved tax, and the L means it's a legislative tax. And then the column I really want to explain to you where it says authorized rate, that is the original authorized rate. So again, authorized rate for the constitutional, that means what it was back in 1974 or the Constitution prior to that. The voter approved taxes, that means what it was originally set in the proposition. May not be what it is right now if it's gone through reassessment, but that was the original authorization. So I just wanted to give you a heads up like that. But what it is right now, if you go all the way to the other side of the report, it will tell you the slot years, the maximum millage, the adjusted rate, and the levied rate. And again, if you see anything on there that doesn't look exactly right, or you think there may be something a little off about that, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can definitely look over those. This next slide is just a screenshot of a general obligation bond. Just wanted to point out, again, that you should be recalculating your general obligation bonds. There should be some type of fluctuation in them. Not always going lower. Sometimes they'll go higher depending on your property values. It may be necessary to go higher if you need to meet that debt service, So again, you can see here, this is Sabine Parish School Board. They did fluctuate often up and down a little bit. So that's what yours should be. And not necessarily that you should recalculate it every year, but at least every 4 years with reassessment, because property values do change. And so therefore your millage rate should change as well. This is another one for Ascension Parish School Board. always great with seeing those fluctuations in those bond millages. That tells us that they're really paying attention to those rates, paying attention to those repayment schedules. All you would do is get the property value from the assessor and your repayment schedule and calculate your millage rate that you need to service that debt for that year. Okay, let's see. We have another question, and we'll address that before we go into toward the end of the thing. So, should we do a public hearing separate, then adjourn and go into the public meeting? Yes. Yes, you should always have your public hearing separate and then adjourn it and then go into a public meeting. That's exactly what you should do. That way it tells the public when the public hearing is ending and the public meeting is beginning. It's very specific, it's very transparent, and that's what the open meetings law is. That's the sole purpose of the open meetings law. Next question is, should newspaper circulation numbers include e-numbers? No, not I don't think so. Not at this point. I'm sure it's coming, but the legislature, up until today, it changes, but up until today, the legislature has not included electronic circulation yet. A lot of rural people, a lot of rural parishes don't have that broadband access, and they don't have that e-circulation, so they have not included that yet. So that's a good question. But as of today, as of right now, no, it should not include the e-circulation. So good questions right there. So now you'll see access to information. This just tells you what's available on our website. You'll see that assessors and millages is where you went to register for today's millage workshop. And I do appreciate y'all going there, but information that's available on that same page is there's a lot of FAQs out there. Those pension funds that we talked about a little earlier out there, that's where you would find the maximum millage reports and those sample forms that we talked about and the required affidavits. The educational materials are out there as well. So the setting millage rates book will be there, and also the video of the workshop will be there as well. This next slide is just, I'm sure you probably noticed we have updated our website. It's very nice. It's very current. And so I hope you like it. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's very nice. We really enjoy it. So that's the page you went to get to register for today's workshop. And this is a page for our legal assistance. I just wanted to show that to you that Patrick was talking about a little bit earlier. The legal FAQs, people they love that because there's public meeting FAQs, public bid FAQs, public record FAQs. I just can't tell you how much information is out there. It's a great resource. I even use it myself quite often. So, and then they do have a link there that you can submit questions, or you can call to ask our legal team questions if you have any question about that. Not just the open meetings law. They want you to reach out to them. They want to be helpful to the public. So feel free to reach out to them. And then here's my contact information. Again, feel free to contact me if you have any questions about today's workshop or about anything in the Setting Millage Rates book. And once you do get your millage rates, if you have any questions about the millage documentation or the roll forward, I get those questions all the time. I field them. That's what I'm here for. So feel free to reach out to me and answer those questions. I'll be happy to answer those questions. Like Mr. Waguespack said, we do have those 2 in-person workshops coming up. So if you feel like you want to come see me at one of those, feel free to register for those. That information's on the website as well. But otherwise, thank you for coming. Again, I look forward to hearing from you. Have a good day.